The philosopher Thomas Nagel once wrote an essay called What Is It Like to Be a Bat? One of his arguments was that while it is possible for a human to intellectually understand how a bat functions by using sound instead of sight to see the world, for example, one could not truly understand how it was for a bat to be a bat. Closer home, within our species, I think in many ways it is not possible for men to understand what it is to be a woman. Motherhood makes us stark. What is it like to be a mother? No man can ever truly know. And even for women, it's a long slog to figuring it out. You might have the biological instinct that takes you there. You might have tons of books and essays on motherhood, but nothing can truly prepare you. And you never quite master that role. And while slipping into that role, you often have to submerge, if not entirely destroy, other aspects of yourself. It seems like such a terrible condition, and I guess is made doubly painful for women by the fact that men can't ever walk in their shoes, even though they are products of it. Isn't that horrible?
Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen, our weekly podcast on economics, politics, and behavioral science. Please welcome your host, Amit Verma.
Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen. My guests today are Priya Matthews and Gunjan Grover Gupta, who are two-thirds of an awesome podcast called The Mommy Mixtape. The podcast began when Priya, thinking deeply about issues around motherhood, got in touch with two friends who were going through a similar journey, Bakul Dua and Gunjan, and proposed that the three of them start a podcast on motherhood. The Mommy Mixtape, which is linked from the show notes, is so wonderful, and even I learned a lot from it. Priya is a good friend and happens to be married to the editor of the show, Gaurav Chintamani, who has also been a guest here. I'm a big fan of their kids. Their son Ishan is Asia's best 10-year-old singer, and you can hear him on Gaurav's Instagram. Anyway, the Mommy Mixtape is a serious and thoughtful podcast, and I was delighted when Priya and Gunjan agreed to come on the show during my recent visit to Delhi. Bakul, alas, is based in Bangalore. In this episode, we spoke about the notions of motherhood, the expectations around it, what it does to a woman, how it affects every relationship in her life, how hard it is to try and curate a person, the guilt and the shame that comes with being a mom, the difficulty of kindness, especially to oneself, how you learn and what you learn, and so on. There's tremendous insight in this conversation. Do listen, do share with anyone else who might be interested. Before we start though, let's take a quick commercial break. Hey, the music started and this sounds like a commercial, but it isn't. It's a plea from me to check out my latest labor of love, a YouTube show I am co-hosting with my good friend, the brilliant Ajay Shah. We've called it Everything is Everything. Every week, we'll speak for about an hour on things we care about, from the profound to the profane, from the exalted to the everyday. We range widely across subjects and we bring multiple frames with which we try to understand the world. Please join us on our journey and please support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Amit Verma, AMITVARMA. The show is called Everything is Everything. Please do check it out. Priya and Gunjan, welcome to The Seen and the Unseen.
Thank you for having us.
I'm very excited to have you, and also a little intimidated because this is effectively your studio. You guys record your podcast here. Yes. So I almost feel like I'm encroaching in your territory and then saying, feel at home, apna hi ghar samjhiye. So, I've really loved listening to all 6 episodes, and may there be 600 more of the Mommy Mixtape. But I thought that before we start talking about the podcast or motherhood in general or whatever, I'd like to know a little bit more about each of you. So, Gunjan, let's start with you.
Okay.
Where did you grow up? What was...
Okay, so how do I start introducing myself? I'm a clinical psychologist. I have twins, Naintara Tosh, are almost 8 now. And I was born in Delhi, raised in Delhi. All my education was in Delhi. And then moved to Bombay with work. Lived there for 10 years, worked as a school counselor in an amazing school. And once the twins were born, I needed to be around my family, I think, and just have more people around. So we came back to Delhi. And for a few years, my work largely involved, finding spaces for mothers through whichever way I could connect with other mothers, because bringing up twins was a very isolating experience till I reached out, or I also started writing a little bit on my Instagram page or handle, whatever it's called. People would write back, mothers would send an emoji, and that just would feel good and feel like, okay, this is not so lonely or not so isolating. Maybe someone gets me, or oh, there's another one feeling like this. And so through that, through understanding the experience of a community, I think, in some ways, I then started to look at if in person I could gather mothers and have some gatherings where mothers come together and talk about things, not to hang out particularly. I mean, that would be a part of it was, but to facilitate groups that, groups of mothers who also perhaps felt isolated or alone in the journey like me. And a few years went in just organizing these groups, very organic. Sometimes it worked, sometimes very few mothers came. And just like that, a couple of years went by. And now I practice as an independent practitioner, as a psychotherapist. And most of my work is online. I also work with kids. If schools invite me for workshops, if I, and of course, being a mom is a full-time job where we don't get paid. So that takes up most of my time. That's what I do.
One of the sort of tragedies of life and tragedies of our society certainly is that so many people sort of drift along these default pathways that are laid out for them. Like one frame I discovered last year of looking at the world is Thick and Thin Desires from Luke Burgess's Wanting, where, that takes off from the concept of mimetic desire. And the argument there is that a lot of the things that we want them because other people want them. We don't really intrinsically deeply desire them. And the standard example I give for that is getting married and having kids. Like when you're young, you want to get married, have kids, because that is the thing to do, and you never really put too much thought into it. And too many people stumble into parenthood that way, and and it can often be disastrous. But I'm guessing that in your case you didn't stumble into it because, I guess, just by virtue of your profession, for example, therapist, psychology, blah blah, there must have been more self-reflection and sort of a sense of what you really wanted and so on and so forth. So am I assuming too much? Take me through a little bit of that journey of how you saw yourself when you were young. Was motherhood and intrinsic part of that? Like I did an episode with Natasha Badwar where she spoke about how it was always intrinsic to her. It was core. It was the thing. She was going to be a mother. Was it like that for you, or how did that evolve?
That's so much to think about here. Yes, it was to a large extent an intrinsic part and something that I really, I've always wanted to be a mother kind of a thing. But sometimes I do wonder, how do you separate a thought or an intrinsic thought from the socializing, the conditioning, the culture you belong to? How do you separate and say this is intrinsic and this is something that was told to me? Of course, I had no pressures from my family or otherwise, or from my partner. The only pressure that I felt was, again, something that I hear a lot of women talk about is the biological clock, right? The biological clock is ticking. And I felt that and I sensed that. There were so many ideas that were, that I encountered, like motherhood does not have to be defined by age, or motherhood does not have to be that you're a mother. You could also be with kids and have your maternal instincts be fulfilled. So there were so many ideas that I encountered on this journey till I actually became a mother. So I don't think there is I wouldn't say that there haven't been influences in thinking that a part of my life is to be a mother. It's like something that I really want to do. So maybe very early on, we start to hear as women that that's something that till a certain age you got to figure out, right? You got to figure out by this age what you will do about this. And I had endometriosis for many, many years. And as a result of its treatment, there's no cure for endometriosis. So most doctors that I met would say, you need to get pregnant if you want endometriosis to, if you want a kind of a cure for endometriosis, you can get pregnant. And it made no sense to me. And often it felt like a pressure. And I would then feel I'm not ready for it. This is not the reason why I want to have a child, not because it's a cure for an illness. So for years after that, I would just be like, then what is the reason? What would make me figure out that this is something I want? I can't go by what I wanted at age 10 because I had tiny cousins and, they were being taken care by my aunts and it was so fun and so cute. That can't be a determining factor at 32, 35 to why I want to be a mother. So it was a very personal, internal journey also. And after I became a mother, I also reflected on why the hell did I want to do this? Who told me to do this? No one told me this was so hard. And I often would think about if I knew this was hard, and I knew it was hard. It's just when you're sleep deprived and you're just, running on very little fuel and you're just going with it. You're like, why? Why did I do this? No one told me this. Many things about motherhood were not told, but whatever was told, and I knew this would be hard, but what I didn't know and nobody told me is that I can do hard stuff, that we can do hard stuff if we decide to do something. So it's a very long answer, I know, but I don't think I can say it any other way, that this has really, it's been back and forth with, do I want to do this? Why did I want to do this? Oh, wow, I'm a mother to twins now. How am I going to do this? So motherhood is the thinking, the analysis, the, awareness, all of it that comes with my work did help me to sit with those thoughts. I wouldn't get scared about questioning myself. And maybe that was in a way that guided me. My own internal processes, thinking, reflection, yes, it did guide me and help me decide. But I would still think that very early on we start getting the messages that the biological clock is going to be, there's a time by which you have to figure this out. And that has a pressure on most of us. That's what I would think.
Motherhood is such a sort of a simple term which means one thing when most men think of it. But I love this quote by Adrienne Rich in a book of Woman Born, where she says, I try to distinguish between two meanings of motherhood, one superimposed on the other. The potential relationship of any woman to her powers of reproduction and to children, and the institution which aims at ensuring that that potential and all women shall remain under male control. This institution has been a keystone of the most diverse social and political systems. It has withheld over one half the human species from the decisions affecting their lives. It exonerates men from fatherhood in any authentic sense. It creates a dangerous schism between private and public life. It calcifies human choices and potentialities in the most fundamental and bewildering of contradictions. It has alienated women from our bodies by incarcerating us in them. Stop quote. And Priya, in your first episode, you spoke about how, starting this podcast in a sense is a political act, right? Which kind of got me thinking, because I would never have thought of starting a podcast as a political act unless it is about politics. And but equally, that whole the baggage that motherhood carries with it, how do you sort of deal with that? Because at one level you are also feminist, right? So you're kind of dealing with what patriarchy means and what agency means, and etc., etc., etc. And on the other hand, there might be the instinct and the urge to be mothers for completely good reasons. And when did you start thinking about these, and how do you reconcile these?
I think for me, motherhood was something I remember was a vocation that I wanted to take up even as a child. I just wanted it. There is a certain redemptive quality to motherhood, that all will be forgiven once you are the ubiquitous mother, and you will make all the right decisions. And so I was the quintessential naughty kid who did everything that was wrong, quote unquote, and who would just have so many problems with authority and all of that. And I always saw motherhood as this pedestal that I would stand on, and it would redeem me from everything bad I had ever done, because then I was raising my own little, generation of beings who would understand the true value of what freedom is. And it was I think I had put in so much thought, and my only thing was, I could never see the face of who I would procreate with, but I always knew that I would have babies. And this is from a very, very young age. Like, I don't have any memories of, wanting to become a doctor or any of those normal, regular kind of things. I was like, I want to be a mom. And I think that I remember, someone telling me that, oh, if you want your parents to get off your back, just get married, because after you get married, nobody will ask you any questions and you can do, whatever you want. And I said, okay, North Indian, South Indian context. Yes, let's try this. And fortunately, I did find a partner who said, I was like, great gene pool, like fantastic gene pool. So, and of course, my husband wasn't very keen on kids at all, but I think he placed his faith and in my conviction of, I know what I'm doing. So our first child was planned almost as precisely as a rocket launch. I ensured detox a month before, and it was a little bit excuse me, it was a little bit crazy. But, this was my lifelong dream. And I had sort of told him that, aajkal, you never find people who have a baby immediately, and, it'll take some time. And we were quite young. I was 26 when I got married, and I said, 2 years later, I'm going to have a child. And this is all part of this plan that my husband kind of grudgingly said, well, okay, I thought we'll be traveling the world and stuff, but
He must really like you a lot.
I think he did. I think he does. A lot of it has to do with my food, but that's another conversation altogether. But yeah, so it was this thing about motherhood giving you freedom, giving you this sense of, I can do whatever I think is right. I think it's more like, we went through life listening to other people and largely my life, I come from a family of academics and things like that. So it was, these people making very informed decisions, and I largely went along with that. I did my graduation, I did my master's, all of that. And I'm like, okay, I'll go along with this for as long as possible until I become a mother and no one will be able to tell me anything. That's where it all changed, because motherhood is a place where unsolicited advice from anyone, it just comes in. It just, like, from the time you get pregnant, yahan mat baitho, wahan ye mat karo, books, this. And I'm like, who are you to tell me? And it went absolutely contrary to what I thought the experience would be. Just, letting the world into, my little bubble of how things are going to be for me. But largely, when I look at having a baby, and I literally had the most perfect pregnancy. My son was born exactly on his due date. I had a normal delivery and all of that. And it's only in the labor room that you realize how different it is, and how the invisibility of the mother, even though you're screaming your guts out, you're invisible. Because even there, the fact that my husband was with me and he was so involved was lauded. And they're like, wow, they're coming to me. I'm, shitting out a very large baby, and they're telling me you have such a nice husband. He's so nice. He's been standing with you the whole time. And I'm like, what's going on? And that's when I think that's the first time the reality of what I had gotten myself into vis-a-vis the social construct that we live in, that's when it actually kind of became very clear what I was actually dealing with. That it was not freedom. It was freedom only within the confines of my little bubble. And I was free to create the people that I wanted as long as it was within a confined space that I had complete control over. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just sort of struck by how Gunjan was offered motherhood as a solution for some other problem, and you were well, thinking of marriage as a solution for some other problem, and then motherhood itself, and it's so tragic that one comes upon that. But in a sense, you said the reality was very different from the social construct, but actually the social construct I mean, aren't they really similar in the sense that women carry all the burden and men kind of show up once in a while and get all the plaudits and etc. etc. Like, in what ways were they different?
So for me, the experience has been completely different because I have, a very involved partner, and within our partnership, those lines were very clearly drawn. And even though he didn't want to have children, I think being a father is his true vocation, and he's excellent at it, and very often will take on a lot more than even he needs to. But so within our space, it's all perfect. But as soon as you go out, that's when you realize that the world wants it to be different. The world needs it to be different between the two of us. So, things will be said, and that, he's so involved. Is he really like that? Or is this, just a put on thing for the rest of the world? Is he really an involved?
Is he really like that? Okay.
He is. He's great. And I feel like a lot of our misgivings as mothers are kind of reinforced or by what people say on the outside. And I'm so tired of shutting people up that and motherhood can be very isolating, as Gunjan also mentioned. But for me, it has become self-isolation because I'm so tired of hearing these people and banging my head against the wall when it comes to people being like, no, it's not really like that, it's not really like that. And I'm like, I know my context. And then you realize that it is that individual context, especially while raising your children. That's the only thing that matters. There's absolutely nothing else for even that child. It is only that context that matters. So I remember in our first episode, I said that, COVID was a blessing. And I felt bad about saying that. I remember listening to the episode and saying, I feel like I shouldn't have said that. But it was just that it gave us the opportunity to have that bubble with no one around. And my daughter was born a month before the lockdown. So in many ways, her birth was unexpectedly perfect for us as a family.
It's interesting what, how COVID can treat people differently. Like, one of the quotes from Gunjan from your podcast, which I took down, was the pandemic broke me. So at some point, we'll talk a bit more about that. But, on the subject of partners, like one of my friends, Mahima Vashish, with whom I've done an episode, she writes a newsletter, Womaning in India. She talks about, and her husband is a damn good friend of mine, pretty much, another Gaurav in the sense that extremely progressive, always helping out, etc., etc. But she was saying that, he does everything, but equal kabhi nahi ho sakta hai, because it is always, and she just felt the pressure that, her life is just taken over by this. And there's a sort of great quote by Rachel Cusk from A Life's Work where she writes, motherhood, this experience forcefully revealed to me something to which I had never given much thought. The fact that after a child is born, the lives of his mother and father diverge, so that where they were before living in a state of some equality, now they exist in a sort of feudal relation to each other. Stop quote. And later she writes, from that irreconcilable beginning, it seemed to me that some kind of slide into deeper patriarchy was inevitable, that the father's day would gradually gather to it the armor of the outside world, of money and authority and importance, while the mother's remit would extend to cover the entire domestic sphere. Stop quote. And I can sort of imagine that this is, in a sense, this is a gap that you cannot bridge. Like, I just released an episode with Pallavi Iyer, and she was talking about how when she had her kids, she would always keep complaining to her husband that you're not doing enough, and he was just doing everything. And he was doing the kind of silly things men do, like geeking out and figuring out breastfeeding cycles and etc. etc. And at one point she writes in her books, Babies in Byline, that all I wanted him to do was be miserable with me. Right? So to what extent, what is the role that intentionality plays into it? Like, sitting with your partner, talking about stuff, how explicit can you make the divisions? And even after you make them explicit, is there a sense in which it sinks on you that this is your baby?
Gunjan, would you like to?
I love all the quotes that you've got. There's so much to think about, and there's such wisdom in that. So I was always a working person till I was just a stay-at-home mother, and all of these labels didn't seem to ever just really kind of hold in them all the stuff that I was doing, right? So when I started to be at home with the twins and Romit had to be outside and on, often that, this sense of, I'm stuck, I'm alone, I'm doing this by myself would come in. And I would think that I wish we would have had more conversations. Romit and I would have had conversations about this earlier. Like you said, does being being intentional about this or having conversations about it. And the funny thing is that we did have conversations about it. But when you're actually in it, when your babies are with you, when they are tiny and they're pooping everywhere, and there can be a projectile vomit, and there can be and twins is just, I think it's important to emphasize that there were the two of them, right? And they were both underweight. So there was a lot of pressure on me to increase their weight by double in the first month after they were born, which was just intense. So basically I never slept for the first 3 years of my life as a mother, because I had to wake up, change, feed, bottle, breastfeed, a million things. And so the conversations you have before, somehow, it's something that you need to do as an ongoing process. And that is also very hard when you have so much to do to take care of two dependents, two things that are just kind of moving and crying all the time. So it became, whatever we did before, however many times we sat down and, all the things that I had planned, none of it went that way. Because I don't think anybody could have prepared me, or anything could have prepared me for having twins. It is really about going with it and seeing where it takes me and seeing where it takes us as a couple also. So conversations are important, being intentional, putting these things down, making Excel sheets work for some people, reading books together, going for classes together, doing stuff together while the woman is pregnant, showing support, a very visible support from the man. Okay, there are cravings, I will go run and get. None of that happened for me. I did not go for any classes. I did not have cravings. Most of my pregnancy, I did not eat. All the things that were things that I had planned, I thought this is how a pregnancy is, or had heard about or read about. None of it happened in my case. So preparedness and putting your intentions out is just one aspect of all that you have to still figure out once you become that parent, once you're in it. And I think that's when you kind of revisit and continue your conversations. Hard to do, but it's important to have that as an ongoing conversation, not just something that you've done and now we will follow the track and just do things how we wrote down before even the baby was out. I don't think it works like that. It didn't for me. I don't know if it did for Priya.
Well, I can say that I planned for what I thought would be a dictatorship, and it ended up in complete anarchy of, that's what families are. It's complete anarchy if, you really think about it. And then you have these parents who are going like, what did we just do? And I think with my husband and I, it's always been the conversation. It has always been there, but there's always been dissonance in terms of I need urgency. If I'm telling you something, then I need you to react. And more often than not, I need you to react exactly the way I am. And so that I know that you are understanding the urgency of what I'm telling you or the situation at hand. And then you realize that control is a myth at whatever level, even within your partnership. And then furthermore with your children as well, it's just an illusion that you have control over this situation. And then you get to a point of acceptance and submission where you're just like, okay, let it be, and then we'll just see where this takes us. And I think even conversations can be had with your partner, with your kids and all of that, but at the end of the day, especially with small children, it will go the way it has to. Some days, and it's so time bound. Life is so time bound, in the first couple of years at least. And you quoted from Rachel Cusk, and I really believe like her book, A Life's Work, is one of the few true accounts of what motherhood really is. And she got a lot of backlash for how she portrayed it, and people called her a bad mother, and that's what you get for telling the truth. And something as simple as taking a nap is a cause for so much resentment. I look at Gaurav taking a nap in the middle of the day and I feel so much resentment. It's like, how are you sleeping when I'm not sleeping? And how do you look so peaceful? And, and I still feel that 10 years after having our first child, if I still see him, and I remember a friend of ours came from Berlin and he said, the toughest part is sleep resentment, because you see your partner sleeping and then you're just like almost willing the baby to wake up and start screaming so that that person would get up. And it's simple everyday things like that it's so much that it becomes so micro. Everything becomes just about that day, that moment. And if we were to actually say these things out loud, people would be looking at me like, what kind of human are you who has a problem with someone taking a nap? But it's not someone taking a nap, it's him taking a nap. And that's where the feeling of inequality is like, I'm the mother, I should get I should get more sleep and I should get more rest. And that's what the books tell you. Sleep when the baby sleeps and, do all of that. And I didn't breastfeed. As in, I breastfed in a way. I only expressed, and that I was very clear about certain things that I knew what were my physical limitations. I was like, I'm not going to be able to sit with a baby strapped onto. I will express and I will feed, and you can do the feeding and the burping. And, in our lives, it was all very well thought out. And I said that I would express 1.2 to 1.8 liters of milk in a day, and it would be nicely bottled. And then between Gaurav and my mother, they would take care of the feeding and things like that. And it's that very regimented format that worked for us. That worked for our first pregnancy, and it was very different for our second, because then what things entail. Like, your partner also knows what it all is about. So at that point of time, we were also, with my second child, it was COVID and things like that. So then he started putting his foot down, saying, no, I'm not going to do this bit, and I won't do the extra stuff. And I'm like, how dare you, say he's like, no, I'm working and I have classes and I'm doing all these things. But I'm like, you're in the house and I'm the mother. And I think it evolves in a very interesting way, even for your relationship. And I think having kids tests a relationship in ways that are very unexpected, because most of the issues are so trivial. Like, we align on most of the major things in our lives and ideologically and all of that, but it can be the really trivial stuff. But at that point in time, that stuff is so important. So
You mentioned being dictatorial, and Kusk in a book writes about how a baby can be at once victim and autocrat. There are these beautiful lines by her where she writes about the kid, and she says, "It is a being destined to live only in the moment of perfection that is his birth, after which it degenerates and decays, becomes human and sinful, cries and is returned to the realm of the real." Stop quote. And so I have a bunch of questions leading on from here, and one is a sort of a larger question where I'm going to zoom back a bit, right? For both of you, like all of us are English speaking elites. We've grown up in a fair amount of privilege. We have support systems for whatever we do. But I want to zoom out a bit and look at the larger context of women in India generally. Like, I did this episode with Chinmay Tumbe, who wrote that great book India Moving, about migration within India, and the biggest TIL for that from that book for me was that most migration in India happens because women get married and move, right? And that leads you to the realization that men after marriage, they have pretty much the same lives they always did, except they have a woman at home, but otherwise the same friend circle, the same social circle, everything is the same. Every woman is uprooted and atomized and has to start again, and in so many places it is even a custom that they change their name, right? And it would seem to me that for most women, motherhood can also be a similarly devastating event where any sort of sense of personhood that you had disappears, where you become slave to this victim / autocrat, and the rest of your life just goes and the decades have gone, and then you're just left with resentment and bitterness, and however you kind of deal with all of this stuff. And Gunjan, especially, you must have spoken to so many people who've kind of been through stuff like this. So tell me a little bit about your thoughts on this, your experiences.
I can think of so many different stories and different ways motherhood has been for women who have spoken to me. I think it is important to mention that individuals like us with certain kind of privilege, where we can hire support, where we can buy that, and where we can curate stuff, where we can say, I want it this way. There's a lot of agency in being able to do that, and a lot of privilege in that. But not many of us have that agency. Some women could be pregnant and birthing in a very huge, large family where they are told when to eat and how to sit and why not to lie down like this or like that. And there are women who have to pretty much stay at home and just take care of kids one after the other till the entire life is gone. Perhaps my grandmother's life was just like that. Maybe in so many ways my mother's life was that. She has a master's in Hindi, but she never went out to study. She had me, and then she had my brother, and that's how life went. So that is how it is for many women. And I also understand that sometimes having a child or becoming a mother can really save you in many ways, right? It can give you, you are still looked as a medium for the family. You're looked as a medium to give them something they need. So you could also suddenly become this very important thing and then get a lot of attention, love, care, only because you are reproducing, right? And that can be such a relief for some women, because they go out, they work, they earn, they do all of this, and then nobody cares for them. They're invisibilized in the labor they do outside their homes maybe. But when they are pregnant, or when they're carrying a boy, or when they're carrying a son for the family, then there's so much respect and love and care that comes in. It's like it saves them. It's a savior for them. And there's some recognition. So the idea of personhood is also such a, we're seeing it also in a way, in a very, I would think, a Eurocentric, individualistic way when we think of personhood, that a person's existence or my ideas of self and what I want to do, what I like and what I dislike, is the center of my personhood. But for individuals who are in a collective space where do I start and where do I end is not so clear. It's not so individual. Then having a child or becoming a mother could really take you to another level, could give you that respect that otherwise you wouldn't. So we sit here with the privilege of also talking as women who are, who can reproduce. There are many women who try and cannot, and therefore are relegated to that part where you don't belong here. You cannot be a part of our society. So these are also some stories that we hear. So I don't think we can generalize to say motherhood is a certain way or all of motherhood is like that. And of course, through our podcast, we also like to hear these voices, and we want listeners to write to us or, anyway, get in touch with us to tell us what has their life story been like, what has their experience in motherhood been like. And as we hear more and as we'd like to hear more, we would like to know, because it doesn't have to be a blanket experience. My experience of motherhood is different from Priya's, largely also because, even though we are from the similar privileged spaces, also because I think maybe what we value could be slightly different, or what matters to us could be slightly different. So I think that's how I think about that. I don't know if that particularly answers the question, but that's what I would like to say.
No, it's very insightful. I think my questions are just sort of nudges for insight. So thanks for that. But I also wonder about, it's so tragic that earlier we were talking about, motherhood as a cure for this, or marriage as a cure for this. And now again, it's a motherhood as a means for a woman in this oppressive society to gain some modicum of respect because she's giving birth to a son. And that just feels like incredibly horrible. And that whole notion, I mean, it often becomes sort of a justification of misogyny when people say that, oh, things like agency and consent and feminism are all Western constructs and it doesn't matter. And I totally don't buy that. It's just that, if you choose to be part of a collective, that's great, more power to you. But most of these people just have no option in the matter, and they, I guess, can't even possibly conceive of any other way of being. But that's a different rant. But talking about selfhood, since both of you were privileged enough to have a sense of selfhood and so on and so forth, what was your sense of self before you became a mother? How did you see yourself, and how did that change after motherhood? Because did you imagine that motherhood would be one further aspect of you and the rest of you would remain intact? If you thought that way, were you correct in thinking that way? How did it all work out?
I think motherhood really strips you in ways that are very unexpected. Again, you're lauded, the baby coming is this lauded event in everybody's life. And even the figure of the pregnant woman is, celebrated and all of that. But the first thing when you go back or you're in a hospital, they'll tell you is like, bind your stomach and, you have to get it back and things like that. And just the sheer physicality of it. And, Gunjan had twins. But I'm sure somebody at some point would have told her, bind your stomach so that, all of that excess skin and everything goes back in. And for me, it's always been very mind-boggling that people talk like this about women. And I know on the flip side, there are people who would do anything for those stretch marks and to actually have the experience of carrying healthy life and being able to deliver babies and things like that. And then we're told to, immediately after, it's like, oh, the baby's out. And suddenly that's, all the celebration has shifted to this human being. And now you have to get back to where you were prior to this. And I said, why? I like my roles and my babies like my roles, because they ask me like, was I inside? And I said, yeah, you were in this one role and Aisha was in the second, in the second role. And and I see this in hospitals. I remember so distinctly after I had my baby, this nurse coming in saying, bind your stomach and all. And I said, no, I'm good. Have you seen the dads out there? Most of them have pot bellies and nobody is telling them to, reduce the beer belly because now you'll have a hot wife again and child. And I'm like, why are women so ashamed? Why is there so much? Why is that ingrained in us that our sense of self has to come from our bodies? And I'm like, this is the body that should be celebrated. This is the body who everyone told me I cannot have, normal deliveries because I'm so short. I gave birth to a very large baby and a very small baby and I shat them out, naturally. And that's the part that should be celebrated, not this tiny thing, because I'll do everything for it anyway. But most women lose themselves in that, and then it's like the prenatal and postnatal yoga and getting back to it, and so much of who we are is linked to what we look like. And I have this thing of wanting to look at people who post pictures like post delivery and all, and I want to see the difference in what the female looks like, and you'll see these really ridiculously tired women who are just like waiting for the photograph to end, and then there'll be these men, and I'm like, nobody's talking about the guy. Like, I would say you get back in shape before telling me to get. And why should my personhood be linked to getting back that prior state? I have forgotten so much of who I am. Do I have memories of what I looked like or what I was before having children? I'm not sure I do, because if I think back, and then there's this apprehension and this thing of, I used to be really fit and teach yoga and things like that. And, sometimes I feel very, uncomfortable about meeting people who knew me when I was young and fit. And then I, think back and say, I birthed two humans for 9 months in absolutely with tremendous complications with my daughter. I actually had a doctor pull her head and put her down multiple times because she would never fix. And I went through so much, and I said, this is the body that I need to love, and this is the body that I need to accept. And it somehow doesn't happen because we are so much in our heads, like as mothers, so much of who our entire pursuit post the pregnancy is, let me get back to what I was. And that's the part that I feel truly like people should stop doing that, and people should stop saying that, because there is no shame in these amazing bodies that have done so much. And yeah, I think I'll stop there. I could go on and on.
I mean, there is, the interesting conflict that I see here is a conflict between your instinct of wanting to look good and all the various ways in which you feel that your body is supposed to be and all that. And at the same time, your reasoning self, where you're saying that, hey, I don't have to do this shit. I don't need to do this for anyone. And there is that conflict there. And there is, Kusk at one point, has this great sentence where she writes, the biological destiny of women remains standing amidst the ruins of their inequality. And she's again talking about that inequality. But again, there is a conflict there between, at the end of the day, sexual inequality is forged, as she put it, on childbirth and motherhood and so on and so forth. So at one level, there is a biological instinct that I want this stuff, right? You have the maternal instinct, you want to have kids. And at another level, there is the reasoned person saying that all this is also a trap. All this is going to, screw me up in all these various ways. So how does one sort of reconcile that? Like, even today, you can reason it out and say that, hey, this this is what it is and whatever, but then those instincts kick in. So how does one reconcile these sort of different aspects, which I guess is not just a question about motherhood per se, but also I guess a question about feminism in some senses, that you're always fighting against instinct and different kinds of conditioning, both nature and nurture, telling you to behave in a particular way, but at the same time you're a reasoning person and you know you don't have to do that shit. How does one kind of deal with those?
I think I want to start by saying that there is no one way to be a feminist. And I don't think being a feminist means to say, I'm going to do what I want to do. And I'm not going to, I'm going to be a closed person. And I will have these boundaries, which basically is walls. And I'm going to just do whatever. I'm going to fight with everybody. I'm going to do what I want. That's called being entitled. That's not being feminist. So when we are talking about what Priya was talking about, what, the images we have of what a body looks like, a mother's body looks like, a post-birth body looks like, and how we are supplied all these images of how we need to get back to our previous selves, get back to life. I was often told, why don't you get back to life? So, all of that is supplied to us makes us also kind of move a little back and forth with what is happening, what's going on. Again, we are all sleep deprived at that time. We have to make sense of so much. But what I'm basically trying to say is that when we are talking about identities, we are not talking about something that's happening in a vacuum, something that's happening away from everything, and I'm going to fight with everybody and I'm going to create this this person and this child and this beautiful, bubble. It doesn't always have to be this bubble, because your bubble is constantly poked and it's, it's picked, and the people looking in and people telling you how to do it and people telling you what not to do. So this, however much you might think that this is one personal project that I'm doing, it turns out not to be like that. And when we are talking about, like you were asking earlier, our previous selves and, this pre and post kind of a thing. When I was not a mother, that self was again I would think that it was heavily influenced by the idea of that individual self. I'm going to do things my way. That's the way to be. I'm an empowered woman. I choose my career. I choose my partner. And I've got all of this under control. That was about control. It was not really about, I don't know what it was about, but it definitely was a lot about control. I'm going to plan this, I'm going to do this kind of a job, and I'm going to get this degree.
But self-actualization also?
Yes, perhaps of course, it's coming from a space of desire also. I want to have these things. However, why I'm talking about that is because it's very individualistic, right? It's very for myself, and I'm going to, move on in life like this. When you have a child, when you completely flip your relationship with your partner a certain way, that is, if you have a child, the father is involved and, everything shifts and the mundane and the everyday becomes like these struggles, you realize that this idea of the self, which is so in vacuum, so individualistic, it has to break. That is just very tiny, and that you cannot, and that's where the idea of community, and that's where the idea of collective, and that's where the idea of where are other voices comes in. So this I would think that it's really about figuring out as you go along, how can you be more inclusive rather than dividing things and saying, I don't want to do this, I want to do this, but I don't want to do that. You have the capacity, as you become a mother, the capacity for such wisdom, for such change, for such acceptance. And sometimes it doesn't happen magically. It takes a while. Like a lot of women tell me how they don't feel instant love for their baby and this tiny thing that's crying all the time. I didn't either. A lot of, it's something that unfolds. And as it unfolds, I feel that we benefit when we don't minimize it to a very individualistic experience, and we open up to create more spaces of togetherness, of collective understanding, listening, even advice giving maybe, But if it's just like Priya said, bind the nurse walking in with that and bind your tummy. How about somebody saying, do you want to do this? You know what will happen with this? If somebody would have said that to me, Gunjan, you know what is going to happen with if you bind your stomach, what it's going to help you with and what's not going to help you with? It's your choice. Do you want to talk about this? Do you want 5 other mothers to tell you what it's like? None of that happens. When we are told that this is how you do it, that doesn't sit well for most of us anymore, I think. And we must understand that evolving and that opening ourselves to the possibility of, still taking that nurse's help to feed the baby at night while she's just standing there with that bloody, thinking, kar lo, aap bandh lo, apna pet bandh lo. But you still have to take her help to feed the baby in that hospital at night. So how do you negotiate and navigate something like that? You do not do that by closing doors, by shutting off, by excluding. You do that by opening. And that's it can be so, like you said, it can strip you in so many ways. Right? You open yourself and you're vulnerable then. And that can sometimes, at least I felt I wasn't ready for so much of it. But it was essential at that time. And you do the essential more than what, how much you're ready for it. You kind of push yourself and the tolerance and the capacity increases as you go along, I feel.
So I had a question, but sparked by what you said, I'm going to kind of state that question and kind of expand it a little bit, so probably be incoherent in the process, but never mind, the show is about thinking out loud. My question was really going to be about in the context of how you begin to relate to your partner, in the sense that initially when you get together, it's a romantic partner, you see them in a particular way. Then they become marital companions and you see them in a particular way. And then this seismic event happens and everything is just blasted out. And, in a sense, just as a baby is this terrible catastrophe that has happened to you, and at the same time, this cherished project, for the man also, there is a terrible catastrophe and a cherished project. And like you pointed out, Priya, Gaurav had postpartum depression.
He did.
At the start. So my question was really going to be about how you begin to see each other differently. But sparked by what you said, Gunjan, I was also then about losing that sense, that individualistic sense, and beginning to look at the world differently. And I was just wondering if that individualistic sense is in a sense a very constricted vision of yourself and a little bit delusional, much as your vision of your partner as either just a romantic partner or a marital companion would have been really incomplete. And what motherhood does is it provides a shock which thrusts you out of that self in which you had limited yourself, and shows you all the interconnections and limitations and that terrible social tapestry that you're part of. And terrible not in a pejorative sense, but just in, So would that be a sort of a summation if I interpreted what you said in that kind of manner?
Yeah, I mean, now that you say it, it makes so much sense. Yeah, in some ways I meant it like that. Like, it's just such a shift, right? Even to see your partner a certain way. Now, maybe it of course is different for different people. For me, I had my twins after 10 years of being married to Romit, right? And I've known him for many years before that as well. So it felt like we knew each other. Yeah, we just know each other, and we just, we know everything about each other. And then you have babies, and then you realize you don't, like you said. Is it like an incomplete version earlier? Perhaps it is. And using your words, maybe it is incomplete in the sense, and you don't see it till you see it, right? Till you are in it, and you have to hold 2 babies together, and you have to make a bottle while one is pooping and the other one is. So there is so much to do, and I think it's a challenge for everybody involved in it, even for the man who has perhaps not even imagined this, right? Again, we're talking about a generation where the previous generation, so fathers before, were not doing this stuff. So you have not even any reference point, and that can be a lot to handle or deal with. And so I understand when young fathers don't know what to do, and which is what brings me back to opening up the experience and having more fathers to talk to, or having more other people and other fathers to share their experiences. That's missing. That's also not there. So not only are we then handling our partners who have become this other thing, we're also having to deal with this other thing who doesn't have other things to talk to. So there is only everything happen between us, right? So there's very little space then. We're too into each other, trying to make sense of everything together. It can be so pressurizing. And I don't think it has to be like that. I think it can shift if there are spaces for more conversations or just experiencing something together as a community. So if more fathers talk, if more fathers gather together, have chats, have hangout, whatever, let's go play soccer together, let's go do. I don't think that exists much, but I'd like to be wrong. If anybody wants to write to us and let us know that they've been able to create such groups, and that would be lovely to know. But I would think that mostly it does come down to the couple. Everything is figured out and discussed, and also because there's fear of judgment. What would others say? If I tell them that, whatever, like our child doesn't sleep till 10 o'clock in the night, oh my God, I'll be judged for being that father or that mother who doesn't realize that the child must get 12 hours of sleep. There is so much judgment. If I give my children screen time, I'll be judged. So I'm not going to tell anyone. And so we hide and we invisibilize and we shrink ourselves. And we become a very tiny unit. But I don't think that helps. That puts more pressure.
You've spoken both here, you briefly mentioned, and in your podcast, you've spoken at some length about how your lives are so different from your mother's lives and the kind of motherhoods they had. And also society has also changed in various ways, where at least men have the intention now that, hey, we're going to help out, we're going to change, do more than just change diapers once in a while. And I'm just thinking about what causes cultural change, because like Gunjan said, that there aren't these conversations happening. And at one level, the explanation for this is that it's partly biology and partly, nurture reinforcing that to the extent that these conversations will never really happen. But the other optimistic side of us says that, look, in any 10-year window, it seems like we're going to hell. But you look at a 50-year window, the world has moved forward. So what are sort of the triggers for change? Like, did you think that there are some things that we can just give up on, that you'll never have complete equality in a sense? Or, are there triggers for change? Can you turn a vicious cycle into a virtuous cycle where it is actually cool for men, macho men, to be involved parents?
So I know I can come in there because I've seen this right from the beginning, from when I was pregnant to through the pregnancy. Everyone would, I think it was such a novelty to have an involved partner. And for us, it's very normal because our relationship has always been that we're friends above everything else. And he's my 4 a.m. friend who I'd call and be like, come and put my shoulder back. It's gotten dislocated.
What do you mean call him? He's next to you, no?
No, as if
yeah,
even when we were friends, we were just friends. Then, so for us, our relationship hasn't changed that much. It's still that person who you would call at 4 a.m. But his involvement has been something that has been eye-opening and life-changing for a lot of people around, like starting from our fathers. Like both our fathers are like, look at him, he does everything. Look at him, he cooks also.
In admiration or horror?
No, in admiration. And they wonder, like, what would it have been like? Like, would our marriages have been better? Would our experience of parenthood been better had we been more involved? And I've seen that questioning happen, and it spurred our fathers to become fabulous grandparents, to be really involved. Like Gaurav's dad never took him for a birthday party, but has gone with Ishan for music class and birthdays. And that's just because they saw him do it. And they saw him do it willingly and not being forced. That's just that thing of, someone saying, oh, Gaurav's babysitting the kids. I'm like, no, he's not. They're his children. He would be babysitting the neighbor's children, not his own. So I think it's when the language starts changing. And it's like, even for my gynecologist, it's like, oh, your husband comes for every appointment, and he wants to know what's happening, this and that. And even like, I remember with Aisha, it was, I think she was born 1 minute before midnight, and at 11:30 they're like, so sweet, he's standing here, and I am drugged out of my brains, squatting on a bed trying to get this baby out, and they're like, what a nice husband you have, he's still here. And then I realized, because I've seen my friends give birth, their husbands were not there. One was sleeping in the room while his wife screamed, bloody murder. And one was just, like, call me when it's all done kind of thing. Like, okay, you get to be squeamish and things like that. So yes, him being there and being involved was a very big thing. So now when he talks, and it's coming from, this space of, oh, he's this cool guy who's saying that it's cool to be a dad. And people see him with his kids, and suddenly it's changing from like generationally, from our parents to other dads who will be like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. And then, he's changing the narrative. I'm not doing anything. I'm just being exactly the way I was and our relationship has not changed. But I feel like I remember he was called on a podcast for dads, and I felt really affronted. I'm like, someone has to call the moms. Like, why isn't? And then I googled, like, is there a mommying podcast? And there wasn't. There's only Pops in a Pod, and
then you started your own, so well done. And I have called you here today.
and yeah, but you didn't call me before that.
Oh, can't win.
Yeah. So, it's that. It's like, for every change to happen, unfortunately, in the kind of patriarchal society that we live in, it's like that top-down motion where, oh, it's coming from cis male, he's saying it's cool to be a dad and it's cool to be like fully involved with your kids and things like that. And then I'm like, okay, maybe we need to empower the men, and maybe they do need to have these conversations, and maybe other women need to see men who are willing to be involved and be like, hey, there is an alternative to, I won't change diapers and I won't do this and I won't do that, because we so easily slip into the gender roles and all of that. And again, I think we've talked a lot about Rachel Cusk, but her husband was the primary caregiver, and he gave up his job and stayed at home. And yet she wrote, while she wrote this book about the early months of giving birth, and everyone was like, oh, he's such an amazing dad, and she's like, but I have given birth, and all of this has happened to my body, and it is the experience for me, and yet who's put on the pencil? It is the husband. So,
Can I say something? I'm just thinking of two things. One is that, that I think a big part of or change happens when we take the shame out of something. When there's a lot of shame around being a certain kind of father. I also want to say that I don't want to feel good about myself as a mother by putting down fathers. That's not how I want to feel good about myself anyways, by putting down somebody. So I feel patriarchy is does disservice to the men as well. They are, like I said, you all don't have a reference point. What else to do other than change diapers, or what else to do than to have have the home running or to earn for the family. You all didn't have a reference point. So I get it. And the thing is that there's a lot available out there now to learn, to change yourself, and to be able to be there for your wife or for the mother of your child. In fact, if you start listening, she'll be telling you. Sometimes if you just listen, you'll know what to do. That's one thing. And when I was talking about shame, but also wanted to say that sometimes there is a lot of shame attached to how one needs to be as a parent, even in fact in today's world a lot, right? So I would think there's sometimes a pressure to look a certain way as a father now. And many times that doesn't actually work in anybody's favor, not the child, not the person who is now having to maybe put on an act and look a certain way and forcefully be this kind, nice person. हो नहीं रहा है पर बेचारे से, because नहीं आता, नहीं समझ में आता और नहीं बताया गया और कभी सीखा नहीं गया. पर अब opportunities हैं जहाँ पर सीखा जा सकता है, where you can learn, where you can have conversations, you can pick up books, you can watch videos, put yourself out there as a cool father, like you said, let talk about it, that this is fun, that this is also a choice you can make. I think it's happening a lot more voices are coming up, and it's good to hear that. A lot of fight towards the established gender roles and let's break that. I think it's happening. It's been happening for a while. But I think we get competitive and we get a little bit, putting each other down and bringing that shame back into it. How much I'm doing and how much you're doing. And I changed these many diapers. I went through that with Romit as well, where I'd be like, I am doing everything and you're not doing this and that and this and that. The fact is that with children, when they're smaller especially, there is so much to do. There is so much to do. And with twins, there's just so much to do all the time. We didn't have a choice. We didn't have a choice where Romit had to pick up one infant while I was feeding another infant, right? So when you're thrown in it and then you're like, okay, how do I make sense of it? Let me not worry about the judgments here. I'm going to feed my baby. Yeah, I'm going to feed my baby. This woman cannot express right now. She's feeding another one. I'm going to figure out how to make this bottle. I'm going to go for every doctor visit and I'm going to figure out how to do this and that and this and that. Start asking questions. Start asking others how it's been like for them. I think it would help if more people talk and share their experiences and others start to listen and ask questions. And if we, teach ourselves and we let go of the shame and the judgment, that would perhaps lead to change.
My most popular episode is with Shrana Bhattacharya. It's called Loneliness of the Indian Woman. And my second most popular episode with Nikhil Taneja is called The Loneliness of the Indian Man. And they're both about patriarchy in a sense. And Nikhil's point in his episode is exactly the point you just made, that men are trapped by patriarchy and in a sense trapped in those roles that they're supposed to play. And in a sense, it's more bewildering for them because women have frames by which they can at least figure it out, even if they can't act upon it. There is something called feminism and you understand that and you understand what's going on. Men don't even know what is happening to them. And what you pointed out about Gaurav getting talis because he's standing there, it reminded me of the phrase, the soft bigotry of low expectations, right? And I think men can so much be trapped by that as well. And there's a friend of mine who's been on the show a few episodes back, Murli Neelkantan, who very successful lawyer, partner of a law firm in England and US, and then came back to India and then gave it all up. And for the last 10 years or so, he's embarked upon what he calls Project Arjun. His son's name is Arjun. He said, till my son reaches a particular age, which I think ends in 2024, that is my full-time job and I'm only going to do that. And his wife is an extremely successful lawyer at the same time. And that gets me to thinking about this whole sense of treating the act of having a child as a project, that you do project planning and you do this and you do that and you put all that. And, one of you quoted Donald Winnicott in one of your podcasts is saying that you've got to, you can't think like an engineer, but you've got to treat a child like a plant, that you water it and then whatever happens. So tell me about your approaches towards this, because I imagine at one level, and at least your husband, who I do know fairly well, is a pretty geeky kind of person just like me. So at one level, you're going to geek out and you're going to plan everything and you're going to read every book and you're going to do all of that. But at another level, a lot of this shit comes naturally and you kind of deal with it. You sort of navigate the river by feeling for the stones or whatever that phrase is. So tell me about how all of this worked for you. How did you learn? What was your approach towards parenting and how did you kind of learn on the job, as it were?
I think the one thing that that Gaurav really felt when we had our baby was that I always had this whole thing of feeding and expressing, and he's like, I really wish I had the breasts so that I could just feed, and then this whole debate would be over because you've birthed and you've done and then men should be the one who are feeding the babies because that makes the most sense. Like, let us take on the load, because then it goes to, oh, ye ho raha hai, wo ho raha hai. And he's like, I can't physically do anything about your breasts hurting or your, having to express, because like with my daughter, she was allergic to formula. So we had no other option. For 12 months, till she switched to cow's milk, I needed to pump 1.8 liters of milk. Whether you were dying, whether you were, I had food poisoning once, and I remember like drip in one hand, expressing in the other, and you just have to do it. And I remember the frustration that came along with it for Gaurav. He was like, I really wish that there was something I could do. And for us, until 12 months, we couldn't switch her to cow's milk. So she had to be fed. And then you realize that nature stacked up the odds against you in a very real kind of way. And then you go into like the social constructs and all of that. But if you break free of that, at least within the framework of what you are calling your family and within that sphere of influence, I think for us, what has really worked, and this is something I've learned very much from Gaurav, is selective watering. Like, we will just not take notice of the problematic bits with our kids and just focus on the good bits. And that's really worked. That thing of selective, we won't just like randomly, fertilize and do everything for these little plants that we have. We will see what works for them. And instead of only bothering about nurture, we will pick the good bits and really focus on those so that they outweigh the slightly problematic stuff as we're moving forward. And I think that's something that's really worked for us. And I think it also comes from him being a teacher, that you are able to see that, okay, here is a problem. How do I get around it? And I'm not saying our children are problems. They're fantastic. They're not problematic.
They're going to listen to this one day. Watch out.
But it's the art of that selective watering and picking up the good bits and focusing primarily on those and saying that, okay, there are facets of all our personalities and they may be reinforced from the outside. But when we come back home and we are able to introspect or have some kind of self-reflection, and that's something that he's trying to ingrain with our kids at a very young age, that sit and write and try and reflect. And I'm like, from the age of 6 and now at the age of 9, my son really understands the value of self-reflection. And that has only come from years of somebody saying that, do it, it'll help you, do it, it'll help you. And it's just how you as grown-ups are weeding out stuff that doesn't work for you. If you apply the same thing in a simplified form for your children, it will work. But it has to be a collaborative approach. It's very, I think parenting is very much like therapy. Like, it's that collaboration that is key. It cannot, I think, when parents realize that this is not a dictatorship either of your babies, when they are, these screaming dictators of your life, or when you flip it around, and what we had as our parents being maybe like telling us what to do and making the decisions of our life, that the value of collaboration, at least in our scenario, is paramount. It really is, because that's when you give your kids also equal seat at the table. It's at the same height. It's, you've got them a high stool because they can't, and you're all sitting together and you're all figuring stuff out. I think that's the best place to start.
Gunjan, in one of your great episodes, you wondered aloud, sometimes I wonder if knowledge is a burden. Now, being a therapist, being someone who's been a counselor at schools for, many years, as you pointed out, expand a little bit on that, because I think, and this is a tendency men have much more than women, frankly, where you tend to geek out and plan everything and make flowcharts and all of that, and it all goes to hell because, I think Mike Tyson once said that every plan goes to hell when you get punched in the face, which is pretty much what life does when you're a parent, I guess. So tell me a little bit about, what was your approach to all of this, because you would have seen yourself as someone who understands human beings, who understands what you're getting into. You went into it with your eyes open. So tell me the story of what happened then.
Yeah, I felt once the babies were there, I felt like I just don't know anything. I never understood how to do this. All the stuff that I'd read about, it makes no sense, and none of it told me how to take care of these two. So a lot of times I feel that, like I said, when we utilize knowledge as a weapon to learn, to, acquire more knowledge, to acquire skills, we also then want control. But when you cannot control, then all of that knowledge is unnecessary and it's a burden, because then you might just want to flow. You might just want to, not control things and just see where this takes you. And I had to do that because, I was just left with a lot to do. In my family, nobody had had twins before. So this was all very new. And just to be able to keep up with things like who's being fed how much milk at what time, and I'm talking about when they were really small, but of course it also feels like to me as I talk that I'm really still there, still processing that, because they're much older now, their needs are very different. And even now, in fact, I feel sometimes, and this puts a lot of pressure on me, having knowledge or knowing of things, and when I cannot translate it into my conversation with my kids, or when I'm trying to be the good mother, it doesn't translate like that. And then I am just putting myself down. The self-doubt comes in, a lot of blame comes in, a lot of shame comes in. And so I think, what's the point of knowing? Yeah, when it's probably about just doing and staying with it. My approach was, I'm very prepared, but then being prepared, a lot of times we also prepare when we are anxious. We're not particularly preparing to know it better. We are preparing because we are feeling anxious. And I think many times we prepare for parenthood like that. Doctors say, ye karo, to wo bhi karenge. Acha, ye bhi kar lijiye, aap wo bhi kar lijiye. Hum sab kuch best karenge. Best, wo kya bolte hain, room hum book karenge और वहाँ का व्यू ऐसा होना चाहिए. हम बहुत प्रिपेयर कर लेते हैं. फिर हमें लगता है हम उस चीज़ को कंट्रोल कर सकते हैं. पर जब बच्चे आ जाते हैं, आप कंट्रोल नहीं कर सकते. You have to learn to go with that. And that's what I did. Many times when I put pressure on myself for being the therapist, I know these things. In my head, I'm thinking of all of this. It was useless pressure for me. It did not help me become a better mother. That knowledge did not help me become a better mother. What helps me become a better mother is when I'm calm, when I'm relaxed, when I'm well rested, when I've eaten, definitely not when I'm hungry, and when I'm supported in different ways. Like, if somebody says, we get this, or can we handle this, or can we do this, or when a school understands your child's struggles, or when, somebody gives you that understanding, that makes you a better parent and a good parent, not knowing only. Knowledge can be helpful. Learning skills is very helpful. I wouldn't say it's not, but it's not the only thing, and therefore it can be a burden. So my approach is, I'm not going to put any more pressure on myself trying to be, fulfill the role of a therapist as a parent. I'm not going to confuse the two. When I'm talking about my kids and when I'm being with my kids, they're my kids. I'm not their therapist. That differentiation is very important. That understanding, self-understanding is very important. Otherwise, it's unnecessary pressure.
So before we go in for a break, sort of a question about sort of moving on from that self-understanding to actually understanding the kids. Like there is this iconic book called The Nurture Assumption by Judith Rich Harris, where she talks about how the influence that parents have on their kids is overstated and peers actually have much more of an influence. And I guess even in your time as mothers, there would be this moment where your kid comes out of you and it is a part of you, it's a part of your soul, and that's what it is. But then gradually over a period of time, I'm guessing that the kid becomes something else and someone else and becomes an individual, and there are times where the kid will do something and you'll feel like it's a stranger, like what happened here, and so on and so forth, and they kind of go in their different directions. Like even with the twins, I'm sure they must be different from each other in really interesting ways, right? And how do you then sort of begin to adapt to that? Because this was your grand project, this was your family, these are your jigar ka tukra, or pick a cliche of choice, and suddenly these are individuals, and beyond a point you cannot control how they do in life or what they do in life, and etc, etc. And how does one sort of think about that stuff? And like in many Indian families, that individuality of kids is completely suppressed, and it's parents who've lived lives of quiet desperation now living vicariously through their kids. And as Philip Larkin said memorably, man hands on misery to man, it deepens like a coastal shelf, right? And that is kind of how it can often be. So how do you avoid that trap as thinking people, and how do you then begin to relate to them as individuals and not in that role of mother-child? Like the way you said Priya, you said you relate to Gaurav as a friend. He's a 4 a.m. friend. He's not just a lover and a husband and a father of your kids and all of those things. So what has that process been like? Because I imagine that it would both come with a lot of fear and a lot of joy and a lot of like WTF.
I think it's mostly just respecting that intuitive journey that we all go through, and focusing on those little things, those signs that your kids tell, they may not say it outright, or they may not have the language for it, but if they're sending you signals about, and children have a way to get their point across that adults kind of get lost in semantics and all of it, but children have a very simple way of doing things and showing you who they are. I think if you just respect that and you don't transfer your fears and your apprehensions, and that's I think now more and more, the only thing is I don't want to transfer that anxiety and all my years and all the baggage that has come, in terms of like the kind of pressure that I put on myself, what I feel, all of those things. I don't want that to transfer onto my kids. I don't want my fears to be transferred to them. Let them be fearless. And again, Gaurav keeps saying that, don't do that. Like, don't. Our daughter used to like jumping off chairs as a baby, and she would go like face first into, anything. And that's her trip, right? She loves that feeling, and I'm scared of heights. And it really took a lot to not transfer my fear, because I did that with my son. I sterilized everything that fell. I was like, first child, right? You're obsessive. I had counted every Lego, perfectly curated his life. Every experience should be artistic, this, that, and the other. And then it's more just letting go and seeing that your anxiety is not going across to them, and they are just doing whatever it is they are doing. And I remember Bakul in one of our episodes said benign neglect. And that at some points you have to actively do that. Be like, let them figure this out, this state of, and we don't have to be judgmental that our parents did that. And, we don't have to feel like we lost out in any way, because for us to become who we are, I think it took that benign neglect for us to be left to our own devices to figure stuff out, whether it was after taking a gap year and realizing that you don't want to do this with your life, or, and we maybe learned it a lot later. But for our children, it doesn't have to be like that. It just like, I think it just comes from that respect that you're able to give even your children, that you have to respect them as individuals. And very often I say that the best parenting advice that I get for my daughter is from my son, who's closer to her in age, and then he's able to figure out like what her needs are. And she'll be screaming. And I remember this was in Goa. She was just completely unhinged. And I'm like, this was supposed to be our perfect month-long holiday, and day one is like this. And he sat her down at one end of this very large, beautiful room, and he sat me down, and he explained entirely the situation, why she was crying and why I was reacting like this and how we were supposed to deal with this. And I was like, Ishan, you should be a therapist. You're great at this. And I realized that that's all, he trusted himself enough and knew that I would take it. I wouldn't just shut him up and, and I said, yeah, you're right. I'm going to do exactly what you said, and I'm going to diffuse the situation, and I'm going to walk away. And he took charge and calmed her down and all of that. And that's a 9-year-old, but we've given him that. So now we know that he's set, right? Like we can say that, okay, fine, you do what you want to do and take maybe not a lot of control, but the decisions are now run by him without us making decisions for him and him getting the memo in the morning saying, "Acha, we have decided this for you." So I think one has to also be who we want to be as people. So much of us gets lost in parenthood in those early years. And then I think if our kids see us becoming who we want to be, or becoming more of what those dreams look like, it'll be a really great place for them to start. Like, I know the admiration with which he looks at Gaurav going and swimming 3 kilometers and being like, I want to do an Ironman. And those are Gaurav's dreams being realized, but they're also giving Ishan agency and this sense of, see, this is how it's done. So this is a kind of passive parenting. And I think at a certain point in our lives, we just need to work on ourselves. And it goes back to that point where you're not this actively isolated person with this small child who needs you for everything. So we have both ends right now. We have one person who wants to be stuck to us and wants, to be hugged and kissed and loved and will scream bloody murder if you don't give that. And then there is one person who respects the fact that you need to do stuff for yourself.
And I like what you said about, how sometimes kids can see clearly in a way that cuts through the bullshit of adults, right? And I wonder if then there are lessons that, we can learn from them in the course of the whole thing about ourselves and what we are doing wrong.
Totally. Yeah, I think they are our guides. I think I also said that in one of the episodes on the podcast. Here, I do want to say that the experiences that we are sharing are personal experiences. And when we talk about instinct, I wonder about instincts. Instinct as a parent, because I'm not sure about what I think about that. I do know that amongst the listeners would be some individuals who have not birthed a child, right? And who've not done this instinctively. And that's I don't think that's the only way to be parenting instinctively. Sometimes instincts don't show up, especially when I'm tired and I'm, like I said, when I'm hungry, then it's just like, okay, get this done with, sort of a thing.
Those are different instincts.
Yeah. So they'll look at yourself and take care of yourself first and then take care of your kids and all of that. But why I brought this up is because what we are talking about is a very, we are not all parenting and not all mothers and everybody would look the same. This is a very privileged, a very monogamous, privileged situation where there's like a father, mother, and son and daughter. But families look different. All families look different. And therefore, what we are talking about here can easily be rejected by somebody, and that's okay too. I just wanted to put that out there. When it comes to how do we translate something to create our kids who are individuals and who are not carrying forward, it's a tough one because we live in a larger world where there are influences. There is a context in which we are bringing them up. It's very difficult to isolate yourself and say, I'm just going to do it like this. When my kids go to school, they learn certain things. When they go play in the colony park, they learn some other things. They bring it back home. The only thing that I depend on is to connect with my children and to have conversations with them. Sometimes even that is very difficult because there's homework to complete and shoes to clean and bags to pack and tiffins to make and lots going on there. I now like to see it as a long-term project. I try not to fix things right now and, I need to get this under charge and get this in control and try and figure this out like this. So I've really just I'm not trying too hard to do many things. I'm going with it and I'm seeing where will this take us. When, for example, my children do not like going to school right now. Now, it's been 2 years of them being in this school, in a mainstream school, and I don't know what to do about it because I cannot do anything about it. But what I can do about is make my children feel safe when they're with me. Make them feel that I would never send them to a place or make them do something that is not okay or good for them, right? So when they're going to school, it's tough, but it's not bad. Yeah. So those conversations are ongoing conversations where I need to sit with them and talk to them and listen to them and meet them where they are, what they are bringing in, and try not to, again, knowledge. ज्ञानबाजी नहीं करना है. उसमें भी हम लोग काफी बारी ज्ञानबाजी करते हैं. We are all pretty much living in our heads most of the time. But they have to go back. And I often just say, you'll figure it out. And if you don't, you can come talk to me. And we'll figure something out together then. So, conversations and connection and really kind of making a sense, creating a sense of safety, and of course, asking for help when you're stuck. It's okay to have a friend talk to your child. It's okay to have your parents talk to your children. It's okay to look for professional mental health help if you need. It's okay to go and ask, teachers for help if your child is struggling at school. Again, we try to do everything by ourselves and control, and we try and fix our child, or we fix ourselves, or we fix our ways of being around our children. But all of it is happening in a bigger context. Who's going to fix that? Who's going to ask questions there? Who's going to say, why are kids, why do kids have to be in school at 7:40? I mean, parents have to get them there. Why do we have to wake up at 5:30 or 6 and make tiffins? Why are we still doing that? That's a kind of question I have. Somebody might have another kind of a question. Who do we ask these things? So I am now trying to figure out spaces where I can start asking these questions. And if that brings about, change takes forever. So, let's start with the questions. We'll see when the change comes.
I'm going to rant a lot about schools, and I'm sure you guys will join me after the break. But before it, can you think of a concrete example of a time, either of you, when you did some gyanbaji with your kids and you had your bubble burst by them? Or when they did some gyanbaji and they were spot on?
All the time.
So, Ishan started this whole thing of writing letters Gaurav would write to him every night and he would have a response. And it's usually, we're very thing about, this is a certain way we need to be and be a good person, this, that. And I remember there's where we're verbose parents who like, talking a lot and more than hearing ourselves, we like, someone, a captive audience that are our children when, when admonishing is required. And I remember he wrote a letter, and this is after, I think he had done something naughty or something, I don't remember what the incident was, but he wrote to Gaurav and said, you know, I think Gaurav had also said that, I feel very bad about all these things and the fact that we scolded you, because I think we apologize to our kids a lot. A lot. It's like every time we, lose our cool, then we'll go back and say, so sorry about this. And they're kind of used to it. And then in the letter, he said that, it's all right for people to make mistakes. That's what makes us human. Otherwise, we would be robots. Robots are the ones who are not supposed to make mistakes and things. And we're like, yeah, it's okay. And he was so clear, and it was written so sweetly and simply for, his dad and I to understand that it's all the mistakes that we make that make us human. And both of us were like, oh yeah, maybe we should just and it took the pressure off us. And if he's thinking like that, then he's, obviously all right. But I know that he struggles with guilt and all of those things as well. And we all have those internal struggles. But children have sometimes the most beautiful and most simple way of doing things. And I remember one of the teachers in his school saying, but because we are always the parents that, if something goes wrong, there should be a consequence. You should have accountability and ownership to mistakes made, and we don't want to seem like the pushovers and things like that. And then his teacher told me that, when a child makes a mistake, that child needs a lot more love and a lot more understanding, and they don't need punishments and they don't need any of that. So, especially when it's a slightly bigger thing, that they will be, so that the guilt doesn't stay. Because when you get the consequences and all, then you're making sense of what has happened and you're getting that reaction, and then you've got the punishment and all of that. And then when you just flip that around and give them more understanding and more love and more space to unpack all that has happened, then they are able to grow in a way that's very unexpected. Because then they are dealing with all of these things on their own, and you'll see how wonderfully clear it is for them because you haven't waited.
I know all mothers like to think that their kid is the smartest and the most talented. Yours actually is. So, on that note, let's take a quick break. Have you always wanted to be a writer but never quite gotten down to it? Well, I'd love to help you. Since April 2020, I've enjoyed teaching 27 cohorts of my online course, The Art of Clear Writing, and an online community has now sprung up of all my past students. We have workshops, a newsletter to showcase the work of students, and vibrant community interaction. In the course itself, through 4 webinars spread over 4 weekends, I share all I know about the craft and practice of clear writing. There are many exercises, much interaction, and a lovely and lively community at the end of it. The course costs rupees 10,000 plus GST, or about $150. If you're interested, head on over to register at indiauncut.com/clearwriting. That's indiauncut.com/clearwriting. Being a good writer doesn't require God-given talent, just a willingness to work hard and a clear idea of what you need to do to refine your skills. I can help you. Welcome back to the Scene and the Unseen. I'm chatting with Priya and Gunjan, and before the break, you guys were sort of talking about shame and guilt and so on and so forth, and that's been one of the themes that you've also spoken about in your podcast episodes and all that. And I also want to ask about that because it seems to me that it's really a setup. There are such crazy expectations around being a mother that there's no freaking way that you're going to satisfy either yourself or the people around you. I think of it a little bit like being a cricket wicketkeeper. I'm sorry if that offends you, because you only notice a cricket wicketkeeper when they make a mistake. You could do everything perfectly the whole damn day, but you drop one difficult catch and they're like, team se nikalo, which of course is not possible with you guys. So tell me a little bit about this, because you go into it with not wanting to let yourself down, and you have all of these expectations, and B, then you don't want to let others down around you for whatever expectations that they might have. And there's this beautiful sentence which Buckle said in one of these podcasts, where she said, guilt is cut from the same stretched canvas where self-reflection, accountability, self-witnessing lie. It's the same cloth. And when I heard that, I almost fell off my chair, though I was on a flight, because such a beautiful sentence. So but tell me a little bit kind of about that, because the point that she's getting at there, which I think is so profound, is that it's actually coming out of all the things that make us good, right? And it's coming out of that, and it must be so bloody difficult to deal with.
Yeah, all of it is. That goes without saying. But what I think Buckle was saying it in the context of, yes, talking about, how in that invisibilizing task of a wicketkeeper who only is seen when mistakes are made. Over the last few years, as my children are growing, I am learning to be more forgiving of myself and the mistakes that I make or my kids make, because nobody else will do it. Yeah, people are not going to forgive me, or they're going to keep, even now when I walked out to take a break, there were like 20 messages from parents today itself who've copied this work in our notebook, and this is what was missed, and this child needs to do this. There is always going to be external pressure. There's always going to be people telling us what to do, how to do it. Some of it will be useful, most of it will not be. And guilt will come in, shame will come in. And then through that discomfort of sitting with it and questioning it, and it's like, what's going on for me? Or what is it? Or talking about it to someone and figuring out what's really happening here. What that residue of that for me was, I need to be little less hectic on myself. This is a long race. As a mother, I have to, I'll always be mothering. So I need to take this slow and really know how, if I make mistakes, how can I forgive myself? What can I give myself when I've fumbled, or I've made a mistake, or I've done something wrong, or I've yelled at my children, I don't like what I've done. What can I give myself at that time? So I have taken guilt and shame as, when they come in, as indicators or as spaces which require stepping away for a little while from the hectic work you're doing and sitting with that discomfort.
And it strikes me that, at one level, there are errors of commission. Like, you shout at her, or you don't pay attention to her when she needs to be fed or whatever, and that's one kind of error. But there are also errors of omission, which are actually, in a sense, inevitable. We set ourselves up from there. Like, Kusk has these great lines in her book. I know you love her so much, so I don't mind quoting her again, because it's such a lovely book, where she writes, quote, "To be a mother, I must leave the telephone unanswered, work undone, arrangements unmet. To be myself, I must let the baby cry, must forestall her hunger or leave her for evenings out, must forget her in order to think about other things. To succeed in being one means to fail at being the other." Stop quote. And I would imagine that if you try to balance both of them, in a sense, you could convince yourself that you're failing at both, right? And I think one of you also quoted Donald Winnicott's thing about how, as a mother, you don't have to be the perfect mother, you just have to be good enough, right? So tell me a little bit about that sort of journey, because at one level, there must be this terrible sense of loss for the you that you left behind when the baby came into your life, and you want to reclaim that, and you want to relive that person's life in some small ways. But every time you do that, you're doing it at the cost of something else, So how does one then kind of reconcile that, make peace with it? What is sort of, and like Priya, you're a stay-at-home mom, for example. You decided to kind of devote yourself to the project, and Gunjan, you continue with your career, and you're doing all of those. So take me through your respective thought processes to sort of thinking about this, about how you handle this trade-off.
I think for us, it goes to the fact that these humans that we chose to have come from our body. And I remember when I did the episode with Hamsa Anandi, she said, she's an adoptive mother. And she said, maybe, I don't feel that guilt. I feel empowered and I feel, this rush of exhilaration when I'm at work. And sometimes, because she heard the episode and she said that, I don't feel that guilt. And maybe it is from having these people have been born of your body. And with it, maybe there is something that, it's hard to let go, and it's hard to let them be individuals and be humans for themselves, because you're also then ending a chapter that has changed your life forever. And there is so much quiet desperation and yearning and longing for all that we haven't done. And now I don't know if we still want to do that. A lot of people say that, do you want it back? When I think about that, I feel like I don't want it back, but I haven't figured out what is the version of myself that will make me completely peaceful and make me completely, put me completely at ease, where, I've achieved that Zen state. And I remember when we first talked about the podcast, I had said that, for me, it's that, thing of going from the zombie mommy of early days to Zen mommy. And both of them said, I don't think that ever happens. I don't think you ever get to that point where you'll be the Zen mother, all-knowing kind of. And then I said, oh yeah, then we can't call it from zombie to Zen mommy, because maybe we'll never get there. Maybe it's just about the journey. So there's so much of self-reflection by omission also, purely because we're letting go of who we were, but we haven't figured out what it is we truly love. So I think a lot of guilt comes in when we are trying on that pursuit of finding new stuff, because that takes time, and that takes self-love, and that takes giving yourself the permission to be away from your kids and do something like this. Like today, I left my crying child at my mother's house, but I chose to be deaf. I didn't ring the doorbell, even though I could hear her
You had a
cry,
podcast to do.
because I had a podcast to do. And then I could have sat in the car and cried myself and for being awful and selfish and things. But I think that, yeah, I've left her with somebody like my mother who will handle it. And there is resignation and acceptance and just taking it and saying, okay, this is what it is. I'm not doing something so terrible to her that she's going to live with the scar of being left at my mother's door, and this is okay. And I think that bit, and Gunjan has mentioned this in the podcast also, is that women find it very hard to give themselves permission. They'll keep telling their friends. And I remember, when women give each other advice, it's always this very empowering, you're doing such a good job, and, don't worry. But the conversations that we have with ourselves are largely self-deprecating and largely full of like doubt and whether what we're doing will have like these long lasting impacts on our children and things like that. And I think that's where men and women differ, because for men it's a slightly easier kind of, yeah, okay, we're just doing this. And today I have to go away, and today I have work to do, or I have, something, I have a gig to go for, or I have to go for a swim, I have to take care of myself. Gaurav always said that, put your mask on first, be good for yourself, and all of that. But I find that very hard to do.
And don't we see so many women who are not even mothers? That's how we talk to ourselves as women, I think, because I think this takes us to a conversation which is a little bit a zoom out of a conversation, because how do we talk to ourselves as women? What are the conversations we have with ourselves? We really put ourselves down. We'd say, okay, I didn't make that one happy, or I'm jealous of that one. Sometimes they're not so articulate conversations. Sometimes like hate that, or I hate this, or I don't like this about myself. I'm judging myself in the mirror. I'm not as good as this one. I'm not as good as that one. There's often a lot of put down because that's what we hear. Also, there's also a lot of criticism we hear. There's a lot of be a good girl. Good girls are like this, and good girls sit like this, and good girls do this in their life. They get married, they have children. All of this messaging we are told, and I think it continues into our parenting and our motherhood journey as well. There are audiences, and we have to cater to those audiences. It's like that. It has to make sense for other people as well, what I'm doing in my mothering. It is very difficult to deal with something like that. Like I remember early on when my babies would cry a lot, and I would find it very hard to not do something about it. I needed to either pick them up or do something. I couldn't deal with the crying, and I was over investing in things. I was just always there, always taking care of them, questioning the ones who are doing aise nahi waise karo, and I depleted my energies very quickly. It didn't help me. I am often very tired and exhausted now, and that's when it was like a wake up call. I started having illnesses. I started having sleep problems, a lot of palpitations, anxiety. Those were all signs my body was giving. Take rest, slow down. You have to be around for longer. And that's when you realize that this is a long race. It's a marathon. It's something that you need to do over a long time. So do it slowly and take time off. So that's when I wouldn't feel that guilty taking time off. I would actually want to just, I would mostly just sleep when I wouldn't be with my babies. So I don't remember feeling very guilty about so many things. I would just somehow keep going back. I also, again, the idea of going back, or what have I lost, or because everything changes, this idea of going back also, I didn't know what was it that I go back to. It was not one thing in a box. I was so many things. I've always been so many things. My identity is fluid. I'm not just this one thing that I needed to get back to, and motherhood has taken that away from me. It didn't feel like that particularly. It did feel like everything has changed, and I don't recognize what I've become. I don't recognize the self. It's a very, how do I explain it better? I don't know if I can, but people who know would know this. It's sort of a dissociative, like you're seeing yourself from a little far and you're wondering what just happened. Oh, wow, is that me? Is that my hand? Is that my belly? Oh, wow, is that my hair? Oh, I didn't see that. And then you start to say, hey, that's my graying hair, and those are my wrinkles, and that's my big belly. And that's when you start seeing all of those things, and that's me feeling scared. I feel scared because I'm worried about my children. I love them a lot. And that's when a little bit of your own, and I think that's it's been liberating for me. I think my children gave me I was honored. I'm honored by their presence to give me that possibility of being kind to myself. I don't think I was kind to myself even before, as an individual, as a, this woman who's living her life. She's doing exactly what she wants to do, and she's going wherever she wants to do. She's made her choices. But I don't think I was kind to myself or I've seen many women who are kind to themselves. But now I am a lot more. So while there is guilt sometimes coming in, or there is, self-deprecating thoughts, along with that, there's also this, that's okay. This is you. You do this. You made a mistake. Go apologize to your kid. And then you sort of make sense of it like that, I feel.
That strange sense of being disassociated from your own body, as it were. There's a beautiful passage by Cusk. Again, this is turning out to be the Cusk tribute show, but where she writes, "It is only when I walk through the front door to my house that I realize things have changed. It is as if I have come to the house of someone who has just died, someone I loved, someone I can't believe is gone. The rooms, the furniture, the pictures and possessions all wear an unbearable patina of familiarity. Standing there, I feel bludgeoned by tragedy, as though I was standing in the irretrievable past. Minutes later, the same rooms, the same possessions arouse in me a terrible panic, the panic of confinement." Right? What a writer. And, just taking off from what you were saying and thinking aloud again about how women always tend to be harsh on themselves, even if they give supporting words for each other. And I'm wondering if what is happening is that in a proximate sense, they could be gaslighting themselves, but in an ultimate sense, it is really society that has gaslighted them by placing these crazy expectations on them. And then what becomes key, like you said, is that act of being kind to yourself. Like you use the phrase in one of your great podcast episodes, permission to be human, right? And I want to ask about this act of learning to be kind to yourself. Like Priya, you spoke about how Gaurav once told, reminded you of that aeroplane message that before you put the mask on the other person, if there's a drop in oxygen, you put your own mask. So tell me a little bit about this process of learning to be kind to yourself, which the way we are conditioned at first, it must seem like such a terribly selfish act, because that's how you're sort of conditioned. And what role does community play in that? Other women who are sort of mothers or not mothers or whatever, just that extended community.
I think the thing that spurred me on also to kind of write to Bakul and Gunjan about starting the podcast itself was I think I make resolutions with Gaurav every year saying, I'm going to do this. And while being a mother was the one thing, the lifelong dream that I had, I felt like there is a lot more to my personality and to my journey that I'm kind of ignoring. So I said, okay, I'm going to, and I had been Insta stalking them a little bit. And, and I was like, I've never really told them how amazing they are and what an impact they have on my life. And the fact that these are two people who, like Gunjan, we meet socially every now and then. And Bakul, I hadn't met Bakul since college. But then, we had got in touch during COVID and things like that. And I realized that there's so many women who are doing that. And this was exactly the feedback that we got after our first episode. And there were so many women, like lots of women from my class in St. Stephen's, and who wrote back saying, "Oh my God, we do the same thing. We do that. We're like observing your lives." And for people who are writing, and Gunjan would write these wonderful posts that was so disarming. And I'd always be like, I wish we could just talk about this. And all it took was one email saying, "This is what I'm doing for my 30th birthday gift to myself. So will you guys?" And they have been amazing to kind of let me go along with this. I said, okay, I have all the infrastructure and they are amazing. They've found such goodness in their hearts to, align schedules and amongst like birthing babies, and we have toddlers, we have 7-year-olds, we have
twins.
Yeah, we have twins. So it's like the entire myriad can be kind of seen just amongst the three of us. And I think it's just that there is so much more to each of us and to our journeys and to what our dreams are, that we cannot be boxed in. And it's doing yourself a disservice. It's doing motherhood a disservice if you don't talk about it, if you don't change the narrative a little. Because what you usually get to see are those, it's either the kitty party mommies who are there, at 10 a.m. doing their thing, and all power to them. Community is everything, whatever it looks like for you. But for me, it was giving the other side, that it doesn't need to be a kitty party. It doesn't need to be husband or mother-in-law bashing or anything that should give us pleasure. Maybe it's just that shared space and that shared experience, and going like, this is something that we have experienced while being separate. There is a togetherness within it. And so many of us just on the go are solving issues and doing things every single day. Like one of my closest friends actually started a company so that she could have her husband do something with his life, and because she saw that, okay, it was ending up being a problem for her and her family, and for her to be able to go back to work without guilt, she's like, I need him to go somewhere, I need him to do something. So she actually started like a clothing company for him and bought him a shop, and things like that. So people go through to such crazy extents to do something. And yes, she had the capacity to do all of this, but this is coming out of wanting to reclaim her life, saying, I will do whatever it takes to feel more like what I should be for myself. And sometimes it takes figuring out stuff for your partner. Sometimes it takes figuring out help, figuring out, how much help you need, paid help, or whether it's or moving in with family. It comes in various forms, but that's what women are good at.
Yeah, I mean, this is the way you're talking about it makes. What I was going to say was that this idea around kindness is a borrowed idea. It's not, it's a very Instagrammy idea. The first time I saw like these, quotes and all of that, being kind to yourself, ये क्या है, ये क्या होता है, ये कैसे करते हैं, ये तो हमने सुना, ये मतलब इसका क्या फायदा है, या ये क्या होता है. And out of that curiosity, this idea I started to wonder and think about and talk to people about. And a lot of people who consult me, and I, in conversation, like how would you talk to yourself, and what kind of, do you use kind words to talk about yourself to yourself? And through that inquiry and through that curiosity, I'm still building this understanding of what could kindness look like to myself. Like you said, it is terribly selfish. And so be it. We might need to be a little selfish about certain things to reclaim our identities, to create space for ourselves, to visibilize the hard work we do and the efforts we put. So like Priya said, it can look very different for different people. For some of us, it could be doing something for our partners. For some of us, it could be figuring out a way to take an hour off every week. For some of us, it could be sleeping a lot like me. So it can look very different. How does that fit into a community or a collective? I think it is in. So how are we kind to ourselves is through the validation we get from other people. We wait for that, right? What if we don't wait for that validation from the other person, and we start to validate ourselves? Or we start to validate, and by that I don't again mean create boundaries and say, I'm doing so nicely, and don't look at feedback, or don't have your kids tell you you're actually terrible, you yell at me all the time. Not that. I'm not saying build walls to not listen or not be a part, because that can also seem like a way to be kind. If you talk to a person who's not from our culture, who's again it's a very American European idea that I'm going to take this time off and it's for me. It's a very self-driven and self-centered process. Now, being kind can happen through a community by gathering together, having conversations, or writing to each other, or showing support on an online community, or helping troubleshoot something. Could be so many different ways in which it can show up, but first it starts with the self. So it is a self-based idea. It is, again, like I said, borrowed, and I want to try it on myself and see what that feels like.
And would it be the case that the fact that you're being kind to yourself means that you've acknowledged that something that you had normalized is actually a problem, and therefore you need to be kind to yourself? And the moment you acknowledge that, you are noticing that others are in that same position, and therefore an extension of being kind to yourself is being kind to them. Like I think Bakul mentioned that you and your kid sent her a bunch of books, and she said, I felt seen, right? And Gunjan, you said I think in that same episode or some other episode, that when people would read your articles and write to you, you would feel seen. And that's a big theme I come across when I speak to women, the need to be seen, whether it is articulated or not. And therefore an essential part of the kindness, I guess, is just seeing others. And I guess this is not something men or brotherhoods would ever even understand, because it's just not there, right?
Okay.
Because I think that comes from years of seeing our mothers handle everything. Like dads went out to work and then they worked and it was that, and then they came home and they were jolly good if they spent a few half an hour or so with the kids or brought something home, and the expectation was so little. Like kids expected so little of there, but the expectation for we've grown up with that expectations were there for our mothers. Like my dad, the first baby he was actually there for, this is after having 3 children and then grandchildren, the first baby he was actually present for was Aisha, because he happened to be there. And then I realized that my mother had 3 cesarean sections on her own, alone, not alone, but like with her family and things like that. And that was just so normal. And I don't think she ever complained, or even she knew that she could complain, or that she could voice this, that I need my partner there. It was just like, okay, you've gone back to your mom's place and you have your whatever support system. Some had it, some didn't, but a lot of what we did as women was just taken for granted. Like, this is how it is. And regardless of how we lived our lives prior to being mothers, we've also kind of fallen into that same thing, that there's a lot of stuff that's just taken for granted. There's a lot of pain. Your threshold for pain is much higher. And that's something that goes across the board. Like in all cultures, you'll have women who are giving birth and then just handling everything. And it ends up being either you'll have very subjugated women or you'll have immensely fierce women. And I remember saying that, telling Gaurav's director in his institute, saying that, it's very interesting how Aisha's so different and she's so, you can already see this far. And she's like, it's the years of subjugation. Now it's just it's now become genetic that they have to be fighters. They have to be, and then, I looked back and noticed that yes, almost all the little girls that I know, like 7, 8, 9, and younger, they're all fierce. I have not met a subjugated female child who's okay with aap wahan khel lo aur ladke yahan. They're all speaking up. So maybe like it's gone to a point where that is now evolutionary. Like it has to change from there. And that's the thought process. That's what mothers are actually raising their daughters with, because that's what we're thinking when we're having our daughters. So I think it's so deep rooted that our parents gave us whatever we needed, and now that's the logical progression, that maybe our daughters will say, no, I'm not going to have babies. I'm just not going to do it.
Maybe the daughters will be fine, but what are we going to do about the sons?
The sons also. No more babies. Climate change will take over. Don't have babies.
Kati rolls up. Earlier we were talking about how parenting has changed in the modern world, and not even the modern world. People were always planning. I remember, I did an episode on the 1991 liberalization, and Shruti Rajgopalan, one of my guests, was talking about how things used to be in pre-liberalization India, where whenever a child was born, whenever a girl was born, you would book a scooter for her wedding because that's how long it would take to arrive, right? So Kusk in her book writes about how, women who are just pregnant, the baby isn't out yet, but they're already planning all the schools and all of that. Ivy League mein jayega, ye karega, wo karega, all of that rubbish. And I want to sort of not talk about planning and engineering because we've already done that. We've decided that children are basically plants and you shouldn't water them too much. But I want to talk about schools. Because in a larger sense, I think modern schooling is a completely ridiculous artifact, right? Our schooling system was designed in the early 19th century where, kids of the same age study together, they study the same bunch of subjects, you're churning out workers for the Industrial Revolution and later babus for the bureaucracy if it's India. And if you are testing a monkey on how to climb a tree, you're also testing a fish on how to climb a tree, and none of it makes any sense. And if your kid is a fish, then the burden on you as a parent and the kind of stress you go through is insane. So, and there's so much part dependence on all this. Little decisions that you take at any given point in time, where you send your kid to school, how you choose to validate their efforts and so on, can change the rest of their lives. Everything can become hugely consequential. So, and both of you have had experiences with schools, and I know have strong thoughts about schooling and all of that. And I know it's something that parents often think about, but they don't really have much of a choice in the matter because at one level they have to get on with their lives, and schools are basically daycare centers as well, and that's an invaluable role that they perform. So tell me a little bit about, your thoughts on this and your experiences.
Very interestingly, just yesterday I recorded a episode that's going to come out for the Mommy Mixtape with Samina Mishra, who is a children's book author and a filmmaker. And one of her films was on the happiness curriculum, and it's called the happiness class, and it's on the happiness curriculum that has been introduced under the Delhi government and things like that. But interestingly, in that film, and it's all quite nice about how mindfulness and all these practices are being inculcated at a very young age, and how children across the government schools in India taking the Delhi model, and then it's something that other states also want to move forward with. But the right to education has also brought up something very, very disconcerting, especially I don't know if it is for the rest of India as well, but in Delhi what happens is that two curriculums within those classrooms. So there's something called Nishtha and something called Pratibha. So Nishtha is for the weaker children, where they just do like what is I think about 40% of the regular curriculum, and then the children who do Pratibha are doing the entire thing. And in the film you see these children who are saying that okay, we are weak, our sir says that we are weak in studies and things, and there's this division within the classroom because they have to see that nobody fails till class 8 and all of that. And because of this segregation, there is othering coming right from the grassroots level. You're starting with that, and then you're telling all these kids to be happy and do all of this. So if this is the state of how things are in Delhi, where education is like one of their big wins, right? What they've done with the government schools. And I was so stunned, and I asked Samina, I said that, did you know about this? And she said, no, it's not until I made the film. And you can see the children's faces fall, saying that, our sir tells us that doing this curriculum will encourage the ones who are weak by looking at the ones who are better in studies and how far they are going. And somehow we'll be encouraged to wanting that for ourselves, and so we'll work harder. But that's not the reality. And this is the regular government school that is lauded now for great results and things like that. What we have as the privileged lot is again this completely, absolutely crazy situation where none of what the schools claim actually is translated into the reality of what the classroom is. Like, I think there's so much glossing over of what things really are for the children studying in schools. And again, we've done an entire episode on that. And it's really, what comes across is that we're all in this really unfortunate boat, just trudging along because there's no other option. And the other options are very radical and only possible for people who have, a lot of time on their hands, have a lot of resources, are able to, dive very deep into, friend circles and people who are willing to come on as stakeholders. And that's not a reality for every family. And after that episode, I also thought that, wow, I sit right on top of that privilege mound, because I'm able to say, oh yeah, I'll take my kid out of school and I'll homeschool him. But even Gunjan sitting next to me cannot say that.
My experience with school has been, I think I've just been a part of a school system in so many different ways. First as a student myself, then I also did higher education, I did MPhil. I was only just a student all the time, and then I went ahead and worked in schools, and now my kids go to school. For 2 years before sending them to this mainstream school, Romit and I were homeschooling the kids. And it didn't work out for us. We felt very cut out from everybody else. If you would take them for a class, there won't be other kids there because they were all in school. The parks would be empty. So we realized that this is not going to work for us. This is not how we want to do it. The kids need to have other kids around. And so we send them to school. And I feel that no matter what schools would do, it's going to just be like this, one way or the other. Because there have been changes in curriculum, and now schools have different boards, and there's a Cambridge University board, and there is a this board and a that board, and teachers work hard, they're underpaid. I don't see an answer or a solution where something will be fixed to be perfect. We have to see it as a space which is a reflection of what's happening in the larger world. What is going on in the larger world. So if there is intolerance, if there is discrimination, kids bring it in the school. The teachers bring it in the school. Everybody who's a part of the school, the parents send it to the school. So if that is if the school is a mirror of the society, then that's how it is. Then I'm figuring out how can I help my kids navigate this. It becomes a very personal journey and a very big personal struggle, and it doesn't have to be like this. It doesn't have to be so hard for anybody. I think small changes can also help. It doesn't always have to be radical. If we take these small steps, if there's some kind of, kindness in the teacher, or some kind of empathy, sensitivity, where, but how? I mean, I've also been in a classroom with 40 kids. If everybody is shouting and talking loudly, where will I generate empathy for anybody? But maybe I can think of an interesting activity to do to get their attention and get them going in and understanding the intention and ethics I'm coming with. So schooling has been it's very questionable. I'm very confused right now. I don't know what I'm giving my kids. They go to school some days, they're crying, but they're also bringing back, instances that I feel they would experience wherever they go, right? Like this person this other kid spoke to me like this, or this one said like that to me. What do I do? Or this felt bad, or this didn't feel nice, or this teacher told me, you don't write, you're useless. And then how is that child taking that? How is my child taking that? And I was like, then what do you think? And what did you say? So I am seeing this struggle and this difficulty as a teaching moment where I'm figuring things out. And I don't think there is a simple answer to this. I do, however, know that the system, no matter what it does, it just continues to be, in terms of curriculum and assessments, just one size that fits all, no matter what you do. And I don't know how long that will serve us.
What you said, Priya, about that Nishta and that Pratibha, it just is staggeringly cruel to label people like that. Like, I can imagine if that had happened to me, and there is a certain part dependence that can happen there. So that's quite sort of mind blowing. And I'm just, 16, 17 years ago, I wrote this column about how you go to a supermarket, you'll find 40 types of potato chips, 60 types of ketchup, but you have one type of education, one size fits all. There's nothing you can do. And it just seems that there sort of needs to be like a paradigm shift in just the way we think about how kids grow up, and they learn. And I think the big sort of difficulties towards that is, number one, of course, schools are very useful daycare centers. You can't do away with that. And secondly, what you said, Gunjan, about socialization, that you need kids to be around other kids and to experience society and to experience the world, and so on and so forth. Now, since both of you have thought a lot about this, you experimented with unschooling or homeschooling, or at least, given it serious thought. What is your sense of possible ways forward, or are we just condemned to this 19th century artifact continuing to destroy lives?
In India, well, is going to be a really hard one until, like parents get together, or, there are groups of people who I know there are, but it's not widespread enough. There are groups of concerned parents who want to change things, but there's just too much that goes on in our everyday life. We're still not there. Like, you can see homeschooling and like a freer structure, more unstructured learning happen in other countries more easily, and and the way they kind of look at it, but it's also to do with what is their reality. And the Indian context is so much about struggle, and some parents think that, yeah, but this is part of life, and this is also a form of learning. It is also a form of how you will make your way through systems that don't work for you, how you will make your way through places that have no acknowledgement of diversity, whether it is as in terms of social structures or just as the individual. Like, there is no concept of any understanding for neurodiversity in our schools. And that's very problematic, because you're looking at children as everyone's in the middle. That's not true. And I've learned the hard way, and been like, okay, I'm going to make these decisions because now currently this situation is not working. And my kids go to a free progress school. That was amazing, and we were cheerleaders of this alternative structure. And this year I've realized that even that free structure cannot survive if it moves so far away from what its tenets actually are. And it was very interesting. So we've been struggling a lot with school, and Ishan wrote this 6-page essay on whether his school really is free progress or not. And it was so poignant, because this is him thinking that and it starts with, I was so happy in school until now, and how things have changed for him, and how nobody understands what free progress learning and actually letting the self-learner move forward with what they want to learn. Because like one of the principles that his school is based on is that nothing can be taught and the mind needs to be consulted in what it wants to learn. And these are great concepts, but it's very hard to put in practice. It's very, very hard. And all it takes, and I remember messaging Gunjan and saying the same thing, that all it takes is one bad teacher and one bully. And the entire, this precariously positioned little perfect world comes crashing down. And then you realize that this is the reality for all these kids. Like, how did we survive in mainstream schools? We survived through our own resourcefulness and having some sense of self as young children and being like, no, I'll be all right. And I'll, I had a teacher who, before the Hindi board exam, was like, "Aap bhi fail, aapka to kuch jayesh hi nahi hai." She went down the class doing that, and that's the reality. That's what our kids are faced with.
You got 36 in math in the 10th standard.
Yeah, but I passed, and you should have seen how happy my parents were. And you know how I passed? So I had cracked the system. I knew that all I needed to do to pass was learn the geometry that comes from the textbook every year. It never doesn't come from the textbook. So I knew I have a photographic memory. So I knew every sum, and I was done with my math exam in half an hour, and then I attempted one more question just for fun. And I'm like, ho gaya. And I came out and my parents were like, are you done? I said, yeah, I'm sure to pass. So that's good. And like, there's some kids who will crack the system and be okay with this. But the reality is that how many children are in my son's school? It's 122. That's the normal strength of one class or one section in any other schools. And this is the entire school. So we are just a deviation. And then within that, there are problems. Then you have, and then it goes to how our kids are being socialized. And the scariest thing is there's this book called Hold On to Your Kids. It's by Gordon Newfield. And it's about peer orientation and how nowadays parents are just losing control. Is not even, they're being substituted in their children's lives because of, how our lives are as parents. And most parents don't have much time to spend with their kids. So the role of the parent is now being substituted by peers and taken on by non-adults. And that is more frightening. And I see that every day with the kids in my son's school. And this is, again, quite the perfect world, but more and more that is what is happening, because as the amount of time parents have to spend with their kids, they also understand hierarchies and power structures very early because they have been raised by help, and they know that, okay, this is not a parent. No matter how much you want to say that this person is part of your family, they know. And that is what's more frightening. And that really, I remember my son saying something like, there's this one particular child who is a big bully and things like that. And he said, it's because she goes home and she doesn't feel at home. But when she comes to school, she feels like she owns the place. And it was just, that's a 9-year-old's way of saying that at home she's neglected, but in school she gets to be everything she is. And so it is like that. And I said that, if a 9-year-old is able to see it so clearly, then everyone else is in denial and there's nothing we can do about it.
You mentioned somewhere that Ishan learned to read because of lyrics on Spotify.
Yes.
And that is so mind-blowing. And I want to ask both of you that from seeing your kids grow up and helping them grow up, what have you learned about learning? This seems I would never have thought someone could learn to read by reading lyrics on Spotify. But the moment I heard you say that on that episode, it suddenly made sense to me. Yes, of course, what an amazing, fun way to learn, right? And so just a question from experience, what have you learned about learning? And in your case, Gunjan, not just from experience, because you have studied the human mind, the human brain, whatever. So, what have you learned? Question for both of you.
Yeah, that's a very important question. Also, what I wanted to say earlier were two things. That when you say, how does that, how are we seeing this, the potential from here? I had two thoughts, and I thought that would also fit in with the question you now have. And that is that I think things could change. How does change happen when people in authority, people who are the dominant decision makers, do something about changing something, right? They need to say this is not okay, and then we change it. We need to reach there. We need to reach the dominant authority, and it has to be top down. Policies, curriculum, evaluation, because many times, like a primary school would do many things that would be playway, for example, or that would fit the child's development and is developmentally more appropriate. They've tweaked it around. But the child will be thrown into the syllabus khatam karna hai or test dena hai soon enough, right? So the change has to come from top. If there are only 10 seats in IIT, and if there are only 10 seats in hotel management, then 15,000 children will have to go through an insanely rigorous, useless, one-size-fits-all process. And now, even more, we have common entrance tests for universities right now, right? So I'm not sure what people in authority are thinking. How are they thinking? I do not know. And the other is an interesting change that is happening is the shifts in the early childhood education scene. There's a lot going on there. In 1980s, I think the Montessori system came into India. And since then, schools or pre-primary schools, the idea of that started. I never went to a pre-primary school. We were put into a nursery, KG and all of that. But now there's a lot of emphasis on starting early intervention, playway early intervention, and child-centered early intervention. I think that's very exciting, because that's where we can start to pay attention to and notice how children learn. How do we all learn? I basically learned throughout school, and then I found psychology, and I loved studying psychology, and then I just wanted to continue being a student. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do clinical psychology or a PhD in it, so I did social psychology of education, my MPhil in social psychology of education. And the more I read, researched, and understood about learning, that sitting in a room is not the place where we are learning. There we are figuring out how to take instructions, how to spatially navigate this, small classroom area, who's knocking, what smell is coming, who's pulling my shirt, and who's taken my bag and thrown it around. We are learning all of that right now. We are figuring. It's not learning. But I think learning happens elsewhere. Learning, a lot of times like Tosh would say that, why do I have to go to school when I'm learning everything outside school? And so a conversation like, what are you learning? What did you learn today? Many times I remind myself that my kids are in school for 5 hours, and that's where it needs to end. I'm not putting emphasis or overemphasis on them cracking the system or to impress the teacher or be a good student. It's not important. To which my son very recently said, so you basically want us out of your house for some hours, mama. That's what you want. And I was like, yeah, just go make friends or run around or figure out how to be around people when mama and baba are not there. And it's our little established agreement sort of a thing. But for such, I can also imagine for different families, it could be different. I'm thinking of families where a first generation, a schoolgoer is, the ambition is and the aspiration is really somewhere else. It's about getting that job and getting the parents out of this caste class, framework and upliftment. and aspirations. But from where I am, learning, I can explore learning beyond the school boundaries in a cafe while reading a book and enjoying a coffee, or or going for a walk with my kids in the park. Every bit is learning. So, like in the pandemic, when the lockdown started, going back to that, why I said that it broke me was because I almost just established a very a system that was working for me. A school where I could take my kids, how I was going to take them. They were going to be away and very safe, very happy environment. And I was going to start on with things for myself. Again, go back to life it was absolutely in the forefront of my mind. And then the pandemic happened. I was like, oh God, all of this is taken away from me. Yeah. So when you have a process that's set for you in your learning or in your way of being, then you need something to support that, a larger context to support that. But if everything is poking and everything is, it feels like this carpet is just snatched from under your feet, that I hope we don't have to experience. And I try and protect myself from that. So I'd rather say कि स्कूल जाकर मत पढ़ो यार, बस चले जाओ स्कूल, फ्रेंड्स बनाओ, मजे में टिफिन खाओ और आ जाओ. For some hours, your mama won't be yelling at you. Just imagine it to be like that. Of course, they say then the teachers are yelling, Mama. It's better you yell than the teachers. And there's a lot of conversation around it. Some days we just sit and cry together that, oh God, it's so hard. The reality of school is there's so much going on. It's not just about studies and curriculum. Like the bathrooms could be dirty. Like they're not allowed to share tiffins anymore. Like they cannot go out to play in the field because there's pollution. So I don't know if they can be the center of learning and center of our emphasis, or even if I want to create any change through the schools anymore. They can just exist, maybe. And lastly, I want to say that if the only possible sense I'm making out of this is that if our teacher training systems and teacher training processes change a little bit, because it is still a lot of women coming into the field who think it is better than other professions. I will get summer holidays. And there is okay to want that, but that cannot be the reason why you take on a career or take on a position of responsibility that I will do this. And when the teachers are in the space and in the school, they realize it's not so simple. They have to fill report cards. They have to do so much paperwork, so much admin work. It is not easy. And they are not paid. Teachers are not paid enough. So if there is something that I feel needs to now be our focus, it's the teacher training processes. And if that is something that more and more people can talk about and figure out how to do that.
I think often top-down change only happens in a sustainable way if there is first bottom-up demand for so it's almost like a chicken and the egg thing, that how do you create that bottom-up demand? It can't just be a bunch of elite parents who feel a particular way if most parents are just apathetic towards whatever is happening.
But I think that also when you're looking at a bottom-up framework, just looking at Delhi and, they've been lauded for the wins in the field of education. And then if you look carefully, it's so problematic. But they've made the government schools have fantastic buildings and fantastic things. And, as a layperson, I was like, Atishi, we used to use her tutorials in college also, and she was amazing. And I knew and then when you look in, you realize that it's actually a lot of gloss. It's just a whole lot of gloss, and they want to get an entire generation just through that system of education. And for most people, they just think that, oh yeah, but at least this is so much better than it was, right? So you have to look at how will the paradigm shift happen, because these guys are just moving, at this glacial pace, and they saying that, oh, it's better than it was for us. At least there are bathrooms now, at least they're on, like nice desks, and there's a happiness class, and they're taking these they're taking these things into account. But how much of it actually changes the system at large, we'll get to know in maybe 5 or 10 years, or see when you have the first set of people. I think, again, teacher training, an emphasis on kids finding what they like to do and just following that, and for it to be okay, to focus on something you like, and then weed out the rest, and not having to, why do you get to choose your stream only in class 10? Maybe it can be done earlier. Maybe I can,
Yeah, now in some curriculums you can,
Yeah.
right? And that, of course, that is one aspect. And what also coming to my mind is, why, if you listen to parents, a lot of times parents would say that we send our kids to school because we can't do this. I am not a teacher. That's the teacher's job. I am going to go to office, and I'm going to run a house, and I'm going to take care of a smaller sibling and an older mother-in-law. That is the teacher's job. So a lot of our understanding of things is from of how to compartmentalize stuff, how to categorize and say, this is your bit. The school will do this bit, the parents will do this bit, the man will do this bit for the house, and the bahu of the house will do this bit. And everything then breaks down into segments. And even if it stays like that, then everybody in these categories have to really pull up their socks and in some way, really figure out what is their responsibility here. That I don't think the schools understand that, maybe. Like, I overheard a conversation at a birthday party the other day, and there's a father who was interacting, and they were playing, I think, football or something like that, while everybody else, the kids, were hanging. And I could see that for these fathers it was very exciting. There's like, अच्छा, good idea, आज आप लोग ने ऐसा birthday party किया है, क्योंकि साला लाइफ है ही क्या, सुबह 8 बजे जाते हैं, रात को 8 बजे आते हैं, 9 बजे तक टीवी देखते हैं, तब थक जाते हैं. That is the everyday life of people. Now, in that, when they come back and they have had their dinner at 9 o'clock, now they're doing homework with their child, because so much of so-called pressure has been put on schools to change. But that's not the kind of change we are looking for, where the kids have to come home with endless homework and worksheets. But that is the kind of change that is being seen as this is our job, now we will give you homework, now do it with your kids at home. You have to participate in that education. But all of it makes no sense to me sometimes.
I think Gaurav does a very interesting thing with Ishan, and I used to always find it odd. They would go out and he would say, okay, now you go to a restaurant, you do all the ordering, and then when the bill comes, you will check the bill and see if everything, this is, and he doesn't know math, like he hasn't been taught that well in school, and they have a very different way of teaching math and things, but he's so fast because it's something he enjoys doing. And when it comes to, and they're always talking in like mathematical terms just at home, whether it's like the bills at a restaurant, or it's measuring stuff like 1.5 grams of cinnamon for, so that's where something like that would come in. And then what I get a lot from parents who say that, oh, it's very well for you guys to consider homeschooling because you're educators, you come from academic families. हमारे घरों में ऐसे नहीं होता. There's no one who can like think out of the box, and largely you'll see the people who are homeschooling their kids are in the field of education, either at a university level or something. They do have something to do with the field in some form, and that's so unfortunate because life is such a great teacher. And if you look, and I keep saying that I'd rather send my kid traveling around the world, and he'll probably end up learning a lot more than if he goes to school. And the other thing is, children come back so exhausted and spent after a day at school, because it's emotionally draining, it's physically draining. If you're carrying like, my kids don't carry a school bag or anything, but like other schools, they'll send kids with these huge school bags and all of that. So what are you expecting from these little people who are coming back home? They just want to chill and they just want to watch mindless television, and that's also okay. You can't demonize everything in their lives, because then they'll just be completely, they'll feel so trapped. And I think that's, or it's give them 10 classes after school because you have to fill in the gaps. What are we doing, really?
I think the way I think about schools is that I don't have much hope for the conventional school system to be reformed. I just want them to do as little damage as possible.
Yeah.
I think that most learning happens outside the school in an innovative ways like Spotify lyrics, which is such an sort of unintended consequence of that particular service. And I think there's a great opportunity here for innovators and entrepreneurs to kind of think about how to solve this problem at scale. We have like, I think 12 minutes left before you guys have to get to your kids. So 3 final quick questions. One of them, has to do with perhaps my favorite quote of all time. Annie Dillard once said, "How we live our days is how we live our lives." Right. And I'm just guessing that for me, I have the luxury and the privilege to be able to conceptualize how I would like to live an ideal day and think about that being the rest of my life. And I can, at least in my head, I can play that out. For you guys, how you lived your days before you became mothers was completely different, to sea change from how it has been since. And perhaps you have kind of, found, and that has been modified over time. But if I am to, therefore, ask this question, that, and this phase of motherhood where your kids are young and all that will obviously not last forever. So what is that? How do you want to live your days?
Now, as a parent, as a mother,
Let's say 10 years from now, when your kids are escaping the late teens or whatever, they are out in the world. The plant has become a tree and gone away, which is a bizarre metaphor. But
wow, I can't think. Beyond like I have to go back and give them dinner and stuff like that. When you're parenting, what it also takes away from you, I think, is the possibility of 10 years from now. Or I don't have that. I don't think 10 years from now. But if I'm thinking of how do I spend my day, I've definitely started to make more space for rest. I think I've worked very hard in the last few years. And I'd like to spend time resting. I'd like to spend time with my husband, my partner, Romit. Maybe go away and just be in a really slow, chilled out space. Read a lot, walk a lot, sleep a lot, that kind of stuff. Yeah. Leisure, ease, slowness, rest.
I think for me, it's me wanting to shut people up, and I don't want the questions anymore. I don't want the what do you do, and I don't want my kids to answer the same questions. I don't want those questions. Like, accept me for who I am and accept them for who they are. There's this very nice quote by Peggy O'Mara that says that the way you talk to your children become their inner voices, and the way you talk about them become their life stories. And when I think about that, I feel the pressure of that is something I've held on to my entire life. I was the naughty kid. I was the one who never did homework, who got 36 in the board exam. I was the one who, and then motherhood was my redemption, because now I'm the good mother and I'm doing it right. And I just don't want the same questions to come to my children. I don't want them to. Their life stories are not that. Their life stories are not what other people say. Their life is the tapestry that they are going to create, and let them have that freedom to do it. And the only way they will have the agency to do that is if I do it for myself, because otherwise they are going to hear the voice of guilt all the time. I remember Ishan told me that, Mama, guilt is like an alarm clock where the mute button has broken. And
Wow.
he's like, you can't switch it off. Like, you will tell me that it's okay, but until I have resolved it for myself, that alarm clock will keep going on because the alarm clock is in my head and not yours. And I just want their life stories to be just about their life experience and not have, I know it's, all very well to have these hopes, but yeah, we all live with that, right? That's what keeps us going.
Beautifully said. So inspiring. And my penultimate question to both of you is, can you talk about books, music, or films that have been useful to you on this journey that you're on, that mean a lot to you, that you want to share with others?
Okay, so book would definitely be Rachel Cusk's life's work. I think it's one of the most beautiful accounts of what, and it's a very real account of what motherhood really is. There is a show called The Breeders that is on, what was it? I think it comes on Hotstar, but it's something that both Gaurav and I watch as a couple, and it's so absolutely, it's almost scary how real it is. And it's done beautifully. It's a British TV show. That's something that I really look to for comfort and almost be like, if they've got it in a show, means that this is okay, because it's so much about dysregulation for parents and how hard the entire experience really is. So that's one that I would definitely say.
Dysregulation of the nervous system was a phrase I learned from Gunjan by listening to your podcast. So I had to Google it to read more about it. Beautiful phrase.
And I would say Natasha's my daughter's
mom.
Yeah, I think I love that book.
Have you heard her episode with me?
Yes.
I consider it one of my favorite episodes, absolutely, because
I love that book. It's just so beautifully written, and it draws so much from personal experience that it gives us all hope. And so that, and music, So there's a song that it's called I Will by the Beatles, and it's one of their lesser known songs. But
who knows how long I've loved you? How is it lesser known? It's a classic anyway.
No, but Gaurav didn't know it. Do you know that?
Nonsense.
He had no clue, and it was recorded.
This is totally going to be edited.
No.
This is not going to be edited.
So I picked it out for Ishan, and I said that, this would be perfect. And Gaurav was like, "Ye kaun sa gana hai?"
Oh my God.
Yeah. So I think that's a really, really beautiful song. So yes, and those are my picks.
I can't think of any books other than, so I don't find books written on parenting very helpful.
But any books at all?
Yeah, okay. So of course, Natasha Badwar's work, all kind of books, all articles, her Substack, everything she writes, I love it. Shelja Sen, he also now writes a column in the Indian Express. I love what she writes.
I think benign neglect was her phrase, if I remember right.
Yes.
Okay.
She has a book also called, I think it's All You Need Is Love.
All You Need Is Love.
Yeah, that's also on parenting, and it's one of those, the better parenting books that you can read.
And another Beatles reference coming in there.
Yes, yeah.
And I also follow some, spaces online. So Dan Siegel's work, and I'm trying to remember. No, I can't remember them. So yeah, anyway. Apart from that, books. Apart from this, I can't think of anything. Series or movies, films.
What's the last film that made you cry?
I don't cry very easily. That's a bit of a problem. But what was the last film that made me cry? What is this? Andrea, what is that? And what? The one who made the Barbie film?
Greta Gerwig's.
Yeah. What was the?
Lady Bird.
Frances Ha.
Frances Ha.
Yeah, isn't that beautiful? That was the last film. I think I didn't cry, but I love that film. And The Lost Daughter. That's the film that I really liked. Music. My music is borrowed from what people hear around me. So I don't think I have any suggestions or just listen to I love listening to silly songs with my kids. So like a lot of Raffi and a lot of like brush your teeth and all those silly things. And now my daughter listens to K-pop. So that's what we do together.
May I give some children's books
Please?
recommendations?
Yeah, of course.
We always.
So there's this beautiful book called How to Apologize, and it's this wonderful picture book on it's called How to Apologize, and it is so brilliant. And I really believe like more adults should read children's books, and my son and I did this whole thing of a book year, so where he read 365 books, and in that process we found such gems as a result, and we keep sharing it on our Instagram. There is another one about a stuttering child called I Talk Like a River. There is another that's one more. Then there is another one on loss called Cry Heart But Never Break. These are all to do with death and how to speak about death to children, and this was very relevant, especially during COVID. A Stone for Sasha, the Journey trilogy by Aaron Becker. These are absolutely beautiful books. Then there is one that I love, which is called How War Changed Rondo, and it is the most amazing book on, conflict and how and its impact in our lives and the lives of children. And then there's another book called The Wanderer. These are then all of Sean Tan's work. I don't know if any of you have seen his work. There is this most amazing illustrator and writer called Sean Tan, and he has a book called Cicada and The Arrival, and these are a lot of wordless picture books. And believe me, as adults, you will take so much more from it. And I could go on and on about children's books, but yeah.
Well, I mean, this is great. And before we end, the final question, quick and snappy, I will, of course, link your podcast from the show notes, and I'd urge everyone to go and listen to them. And it's not terribly difficult now because 6 episodes so far, maybe 7 by the time this comes out.
Yes.
But what you also spoke, and that intrigued me, and what you also spoken about in the podcast is how you want to build a community of people, how you want to build a conversation around all of these things, and how you, in fact, solicit contributions, feedback, so on and so forth. So what would you like to say about your podcast? Where can people write to you, etc., etc.?
So as of now, we have an Instagram page that's also called the Mommy Mixtape, and you can write in over there, or there's the Mommy Mixtape at gmail.com, but nobody uses email anymore. So I think DMs on Instagram, and then personal messages from friends or friends or friends, though that's what usually happens. But for us, I think what's most important is just broadening the circle. And motherhood doesn't need to be an isolating experience. And while you are cooped up in a room, and it's very sad that most women breastfeed alone, even at parties and things like that, and it's very isolating physically, mentally, and all of that. I think it's when you just knowing that there are other people, whether you're just stalking them online or you actually reach out. I would always say that just, DM, even if it's a famous person, or even if it's like someone moderately, important, or who you would ordinarily think is difficult to approach, whether it's authors or doctors or any of it. I think the conversation has to be more inclusive for all sorts of mothers, and maybe fathers get on board too.
More power to you guys. Priya and Gunjan, thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for coming on the show.
Thank you, Amit. This was lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, do share it with anyone you think might be interested. Check out the show notes, enter rabbit holes at will. Priya and Gunjan's social media handles are linked from there. You can follow me on Twitter at Amit Varma, AmitVarma, and you can browse past episodes of The Seen and the Unseen at seenunseen.in. Thank you for listening. Did you enjoy this episode of The Seen and the Unseen? If so, would you like to support the production of the show? You can go over to seenunseen.in/support and contribute any amount you like to keep this podcast alive and kicking. Thank you.